Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into The Fiction World, presenting to you today, What If Betrayed Izuku awakened Hollow King powers in Bleach and formed breeding harem with Halibel, Yoruichi and Nell. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Boy They Broke. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Izuku had been in the middle of rewrapping his hands, the third time that week, because the support bandages UA issued never quite fit right around knuckles that had been broken and reset so many times they developed their own geography, when Uraraka slid it under his dorm room door. No knock. No voice. Just the soft whisper of paper across tile and the sound of retreating footsteps. He stared at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. Midoriya Izuku. Class 1A, UA Hero Course. His own name, written in the formal script of the Hero Public Safety Commission. He should have known then. He should have felt it, that particular cold that settles in the chest when something irreversible is already in motion. But Izuku had spent 16 years training himself to believe in people, to look for the good angle, the hidden kindness, the misunderstood motivation. It was the first thing All Might had ever really taught him, not with words but with the way he smiled even when he was bleeding. So he opened the letter. He read it 3 times. Then he sat down on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. The commission's language was clean and bureaucratic and utterly devastating. Threat assessment. Uncontrolled quirk evolution. Public safety risk classification, Omega. They'd been monitoring the changes in One for All for months, apparently. The way it had started manifesting predecessor quirks without Izuku consciously summoning them. The way his Ryatsu, though they didn't call it that, they called it residual quirk radiation, had begun affecting civilians in a 3-block radius during his last major battle. Destabilizing electronics. Disrupting the quirks of bystanders. The commission's conclusion was precisely 4 sentences long. Student Midoriya's continued presence in active hero training constitutes an unacceptable risk. His provisional license is hereby suspended pending further evaluation. UA has been notified and has agreed to the terms of temporary expulsion. A commission representative will arrive Friday to discuss containment options. Containment. Not help. Not support. Not we'd like to work with you on managing this development. Containment. He went to Aizawa first, because Aizawa had always been honest with him even when honesty hurt. He found his homeroom teacher in the staff lounge, coffee in hand, reading a report that Izuku recognized, because it had his name at the top. You already knew, Izuku said. Aizawa didn't look up immediately. When he did, his expression was the same carefully neutral mask he wore during assessments. The decision came down 2 days ago. I was instructed not to inform you until the letter arrived. You were instructed. The word tasted strange. Sensei, we're talking about my entire future, I know what we're talking about. Finally Aizawa set the report down. He looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep deprivation, a bone-deep weariness that Izuku had never seen on him before. I argued against it, Midoriya. For what it's worth. What did they say? They said the risk calculus had changed. A pause. They said All Might agreed with the assessment. The room got very quiet. Izuku heard his own heartbeat. Felt the slight tremor that moved through his fingers, not the old tremor of overworked muscles but something newer, something that lived in his bones and hummed at a frequency he couldn't quite name. All Might, he said carefully, agreed. He was consulted. As the previous bearer of One for All. Aizawa's voice was even. Precise. His assessment was that the quirk's evolution had moved beyond the intended parameters. That continued training under current conditions posed, he said, containment. Izuku's voice came out very flat. He used that word. Aizawa didn't answer. Which was an answer. Izuku left the staff lounge. He walked down the hallway with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders straight and his face doing the thing it had learned to do during the worst moments, going very still, like a pond after a stone has already sunk. The ripples were there. You just couldn't see them from the surface. He found the rest of Class 1A in the common room. They already knew. He could tell from the way conversation stopped half a breath before they would have naturally ended, from the way Kirishima was looking at the floor, from the way Uraraka had positioned herself beside Ida rather than her usual spot near the window. Even Todoroki, who could go hours without readable expression, had something in his face that might have been discomfort, might have been relief. Bakugo was the only one looking directly at him. Deku. His voice was different from usual. Not the sneering aggression, not the explosive contempt. Something quieter and somehow worse. Sit down. I'm fine standing. I said sit down. Izuku looked at him. Really looked, at the tension in Bakugo's jaw, the way his hands were flat on his thighs rather than curled to spark. You knew too. We all knew. Bakugo's chin lifted slightly. The commission briefed Todoroki and me yesterday. As class representatives. As class representatives. Izuku repeated the words the same way he'd repeated Aizawa's. Tasting them. Finding them hollow. And what did you tell them? Bakugo was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. In 16 years of knowing him, Izuku had learned that 3 seconds of silence from Katsuki Bakugo was the loudest thing in any room. I told them the assessment was accurate. Something in Izuku's chest made a sound like ice cracking over deep water. Kaken, don't. The word came out sharp and immediate. Don't do the voice. Don't look at me like that. This isn't about, it's not personal, Deku. The commission showed us the data. Your Ryatsu readings during the Kanagawa incident were off every chart they had. 3 bystanders were hospitalized. 2 of them lost quirk function for 48 hours. His jaw tightened. You didn't even notice. I was in the middle of a battle, you didn't notice, Bakugo repeated, and there was something in his voice now that Izuku couldn't categorize, something that lived between anger and grief and came out sounding like neither. That's the point. You didn't notice because it's getting too big, and you can't control what you can't see. A breath. I'm not saying you're a villain. I'm saying you're a bomb that doesn't know it's ticking. The room was very quiet. Uraraka was looking at her hands. Kirishima had his eyes closed. Todoroki was watching Izuku with that flat silver and gray gaze, and Izuku realized with a jolt that Todoroki had already made his decision too, had made it yesterday, in a commission briefing room, and hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't knocked on his door. None of them had. So that's it, Izuku said. That's not, we're not abandoning you, Uraraka said, her voice catching. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. The commission said once containment protocols are established, once there's a safe framework, containment, Izuku said again. The word was starting to feel like a stone in his mouth. You keep using that word. Midoriya. Ida stood. Formal. Upright. The class representative in every line of his body. We discussed this at length. The decision was not made lightly. Your safety and the safety of the public, were you going to tell me? Izuku asked. His voice was still very flat. Very still. The pond. Any of you. Were you going to come to me first, before the commission? Before Aizawa? He looked around the room, at every face he'd bled beside, laughed beside, grown up beside. Was anyone going to give me the chance to what? Bakugo's voice cracked like a whip. To argue your way out of data? You're not the protagonist of a story, Deku. You don't get to make a speech and change the numbers. He was on his feet now, and his hands were sparking, not with aggression but with something Izuku had only seen once before, during their last real fight, that terrible night in Kamino. Something desperate. I'm trying to keep you alive. Do you get that? The commission's containment option is the soft version. There are people in that building who want to, he stopped himself. Jaw working. Just go. Go with them Friday. Let them build the protocols. Come back when it's safe. Come back. Like he'd be coming back to the same room, the same class, the same version of anything. Izuku looked at Katsuki Bakugo, at the boy who had called him worthless for a decade and then spent 4 years quietly, furiously rewriting that assessment one bruise at a time, and understood with crystalline clarity that Bakugo believed every word he'd just said. That this was, in Bakugo's mind, the rational choice. The protective one. That didn't make it less of a betrayal. Okay, Izuku said. He went upstairs. He packed a bag. Not everything, just the things that mattered, the worn hero analysis notebooks, his mother's photo, the small metal pin All Might had given him in first year. He sat with that pin in his palm for a long time, turning it over, feeling the weight of it. Then he put it on his desk and left it there. He walked out of UA at 11:47 p.m., through a side exit, past a security system he'd spent 3 years learning the patterns of. Not running. Just walking, with his bag over one shoulder and one for all sitting in his blood like a star going supernova in slow motion. He didn't have a plan. He had a direction, a way, and a feeling that had been growing in his chest since he'd read that letter, a pressure that built with every step, like something enormous was trying to find its shape inside him. He made it 4 kilometers from UA before the rift opened. He didn't cause it. He was sure of that, after, as sure as he could be about anything that happened in the next 3 minutes. One moment he was walking along the canal road, the next there was a sound like reality clearing its throat, a vertical tear in the air approximately 6 feet tall and the color of deep space, crackling at the edges with energy that made his teeth ache. From it came 3 things in rapid succession, a blast of cold that smelled like bone and iron, a pressure wave that knocked him back 2 steps, and a hollow the size of a truck. It was already injured, half its mass cracked, its movements erratic. Whatever had happened on the other side of that rift, it had been losing. But losing didn't mean it wasn't dangerous, and it fixed on Izuku with the immediate, mindless hunger of something that had sent it something exceptional. Izuku hit it with 60% of one for all before he'd consciously decided to engage. The shockwave cratered the road surface and blew out 3 streetlights. The hollow shrieked, a sound that existed in frequencies below hearing, and hit back. He blocked. Felt the impact travel through his arms, through his spine, all the way to the ground. Felt something answer it from inside him, not one for all, something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same space but spoke a different language. The hollow hit him again. He went into the canal. The cold hit him like a wall. He went under, and the world above the water went abstract, lights and sound and the massive dark shape of the hollow blocking the canal road, and then the rift, which had been slowly closing, lurched and expanded, and Izuku felt the pull of it even through 8 feet of water. He surfaced. The pull intensified. The hollow turned toward the rift, then back to him, torn between threats, and in that moment of its indecision Izuku felt the pressure in his chest reach a kind of critical threshold. It didn't feel like power. It felt like recognition. Like something enormous turning its attention toward him from very far away and saying, "Oh. There you are." The rift pulled them both in. He fell for what felt like a very long time. The space between, whatever it was, wasn't dark exactly. It was the absence of light in a way that had texture, that pressed against his skin with something between cold and heat. He was aware of one for all in his blood, aware of it cycling through its predecessor quirks in rapid succession like a panicked system reboot, and beneath it that other thing, that recognition feeling, growing louder and more present with every second. He hit ground with bone-jarring force. Sand. White sand, impossibly fine, reflecting a sky the color of a moonless night even though there was no moon. The air smelled like ozone and old stone and something older than both. Hueco Mundo. He didn't know how he knew the name. He just did, the same way he knew the word Ryatsu and the word hollow and the architectural language of the great white structure visible in the distance, the way you sometimes wake from dreams knowing the name of a place you've never been. The hollow he'd fought through the rift was dead. Or, dissolved. There was a smear of dark matter on the sand 20 meters away, already sinking into the white. He didn't remember killing it. He thought maybe the fall had done it, or maybe the rift itself had, or maybe, he looked at his hands. His right hand was sheathed in something. Not bone. Not armor in any conventional sense. A layered covering of spiritual material, white-blue, that extended to his elbow and had grown there the way ice grows, gradually, then all at once. At the center of his palm, where the convergence of all one for all's power always collected, there was a fracture pattern. Like a mask. Like the beginning of a hollow's mask, except it was growing inward rather than outward, pressing into his skin and integrating rather than encasing. He pressed his other hand against it. It hummed. "You should be dead," said a voice. He looked up. She was standing 30 feet away, and she had been watching him for long enough that there was no performance in her posture, no readiness for battle, no announcement of threat. Just observation. Pure and clinical and, underneath that, something that might have been curiosity. Tia Halibel. He didn't know her name yet. He knew what she was, Arankar, Espada from the cut of her Ryatsu, and if the current pressing against him from her direction was any measure, she was significant, the kind of significant that made his danger instincts, honed by 4 years of UA, go very quiet and very careful. He knew she was watching him with eyes the color of sea glass, calm in a way that had nothing to do with stillness. She was calm the way a deep ocean current is calm. From the surface it looks like nothing. It will still drown you. She was also, in some peripheral part of his awareness, one of the most striking people he'd ever seen. He filed that observation under irrelevant and focused on the hand that had grown spiritual armor and the woman with sea glass eyes who thought he should be dead. "I fell through a rift," he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "I'm not entirely sure what just happened." "You absorbed a hollow mid-fall," she said. "Or it absorbed you. The distinction is usually academic, the human body cannot survive the integration. The soul fractures." She tilted her head slightly. "Yours didn't." He looked back at his hand. The white-blue sheathing had spread another centimeter while they'd been talking. "That's bad," he said. "That depends entirely on what you are." He stopped. Thought about the letter. Thought about Bakugo's 3 seconds of silence. Thought about All Might's face, the last time they'd spoken, and the careful way All Might had said "Your power is evolving, my boy," in a tone that meant something else entirely. "I'm working on that." Something moved in Halibel's expression. Not warmth exactly. But the absence of cold, which in her particular register might have been the same thing. She looked at his arm again, at the spreading integration, and said, "You have approximately 6 hours before that process reaches your heart. After that, the outcome becomes unpredictable." Unpredictable as in you either become something entirely new, or you stop being anything at all. A pause. "I've seen it happen 4 times. Twice the human survived." She said survived like the word had footnotes. Twice they didn't. What was different? She looked at him for a long moment. The ones who survived wanted to live more than they wanted to stay the same. That landed somewhere soft in him, in the bruised place that the letter had hit and Bakugo's 3 seconds had deepened and the empty desk with the pin on it had finished. He sat with it for a moment. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he said. "I'm a hero, I was training to be a hero." He paused. "I got expelled today." "For what reason?" "My power was becoming dangerous." He almost laughed. The sound that came out wasn't quite a laugh but it was adjacent. "Apparently I was a bomb that didn't know it was ticking." Halibel was quiet. The white sand shifted in a wind that came from nowhere, and somewhere in the far distance something howled, a hollow call, distant and mournful. "The last person who held power they couldn't control," she said, "tried to make himself a god. He manipulated everyone around him. Sacrificed everything for absolute control." Her voice was perfectly level. His name was Aizen. I know who Aizen was, Izuku said, which was another thing he shouldn't have known and did. The integration knowledge. The growing inheritance of the thing pressing into his palm. I'm not him. I know. The certainty in her voice was startling. If you were, the hollow that fell with you would have integrated differently. The process has a signature. Aizen's power sought control. Yours, she paused again, and in the pause was something she seemed to be deciding whether to voice. Yours sought shelter. He looked at her. It wrapped around you the way a hollow wraps around grief, she said. Like something trying to protect what's left. She turned, then, looking out toward the distant white structure. Come. If you're going to survive the next 6 hours, you'll need somewhere to do it that isn't the open desert. He got to his feet. His legs were steadier than they had any right to be. One for all moved in his blood, not aggressively, not in that building toward explosion way it had been doing for months, but fluidly, like it was learning new grammar. Working alongside something rather than against it. He followed her. Are you going to tell me your name? He asked, walking. Halibel, she said. Tia Halibel. Halibel-san, he said, the honorific automatic. She glanced back at him. Something in her expression shifted fractionally, that almost warmth again, there and gone. Just Halibel, she said. Las Noches was enormous and half-ruined and entirely alive. Not alive with people, Izuku saw no one in the outer corridors they walked through, though he felt presences at the edge of his expanding awareness, small and careful, watching. The architecture was bone and moonstone, everything massive and white and designed for beings that thought in geological time. His footsteps echoed. Hers didn't. She took him to a room that must once have been a medical quarter, or her equivalent of one. Stone surfaces, but clean. A basin of water that was clearly not decorative. She gestured to the flat surface that served as a table seat bed in the Hueco Mundo architectural vocabulary, and he sat, and she stood across from him and watched the integration with the focused attention of someone who had watched it before and knew exactly what to look for. The arm, she said. Does it hurt? No. He turned it over. The white-blue material had a faint luminescence. It feels like when I first learned to use my quirk consciously. Like my body learning new language. The hollow power is settling around one for all rather than replacing it, she observed, and she said it like a neutral fact, but Izuku heard the undercurrent of surprise. That shouldn't be possible. People keep telling me things I do shouldn't be possible. How many times has your arm been broken? The question was so unexpected he blinked. Ah, my right arm. Maybe 15 significant fractures. More minor ones. And the left? Fewer. I learned to favor it after. He stopped. Why? Your body has built scar architecture that normal healing wouldn't create, she said. Dense spiritual pathways, layered through physical tissue. You've been building a conductor for spiritual energy without knowing it. She crouched, bringing herself to his eye level, and examined the integration point at his palm without touching it. This close, he could see the markings on her skin, the Aaroncar's tell signs of hollow origin, and the absolute steadiness in her eyes. You've been becoming capable of this for years. The hollow you fell through just opened a door that was already being built. Is that good news or bad news? It means you won't die from it. She stood. It's the only news that matters right now. He exhaled. Slowly. The release of a tension he hadn't consciously been holding. You could have left me in the desert, he said. Yes. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a moment, and he had the sense that she was deciding how honest to be, calculating something, not deceptively but practically, the way you calculate load-bearing weight before you step on ice. 3 years ago, she said, my fraction were killed protecting me. They were loyal to me not because I demanded it but because they chose it, and they died for that choice, and there was nothing I could do. Her voice was even throughout. Precise. But the evenness cost something, he could see the price of it in the slight tension at the corners of her jaw. I have spent 3 years in this desert asking what loyalty is worth when it ends in sand. A pause. You fell through a rift into an alien world with power trying to tear you apart from the inside, and the first thing you did was get back on your feet. You didn't panic, she said. You assessed. You introduced yourself. You asked questions. Her sea-glass eyes met his directly. I have seen gods fall into this desert and beg. You didn't beg. He didn't know what to say to that. I'm not a god, he said finally. No, she agreed. But you might be something more useful. The 6 hours passed in fragments. Halibel brought food, or Hueco Mundo's equivalent, which was not precisely food but served the same biological function and tasted like mineral water and something distantly savory. She asked him questions about his world with the focused curiosity of someone building a structural model, not making conversation. He answered honestly, including the parts that were humiliating, because she asked with the kind of directness that made evasion feel childish. He told her about One for All. About All Might and the weight of that inheritance. About 4 years of breaking himself and rebuilding stronger, about the predecessor quirks manifesting without control, about the growing Ryatsu readings that had alarmed the commission, about Bakugo's face and Uraraka's wet eyes and the pin he'd left on the desk. She listened without interrupting. Without performing sympathy. When he finished, she said, You gave them everything. I tried to. And they chose safety over loyalty. He thought about arguing with that framing. Decided against it. Bakugo would say those aren't opposed. Bakugo, she said, with the precise neutrality of someone taking a name and filing it, would be wrong. He almost smiled. Around hour 4, the integration reached his shoulder, and the pain arrived, not sharp, not the specific anguish of broken bone, but a deep systemic ache like his entire nervous system was being rerouted. He gripped the stone surface and breathed through it the way he'd been taught, the way his body had learned, and Halibel watched him without offering help because she could see he didn't need it, which he appreciated more than if she pretended comfort. Talk to me, he said through his teeth. Tell me something. She considered for a moment. Aizen told me once that the purpose of power was to eliminate the need for trust. That the highest evolution of strength was self-sufficiency. The removal of all vulnerability. Do you believe that? I believed it for 3 years after my fraction died. Her voice was even. I stopped believing it approximately 40 minutes ago. He looked at her through the pain. What happened 40 minutes ago? I met someone who was given every reason to stop trusting, she said, and didn't. The integration hit his chest. It was, not painful, exactly. It was enormous. Like standing at the base of a waterfall and feeling the pressure of it, but from the inside out. One for All blazed, literally blazed, green-white lightning crackling across his skin, the predecessor quirks flaring in sequence like lights down a corridor, and met the incoming hollow power, and there was a moment, a genuinely terrifying moment, where they pushed against each other with tectonic force. Halibel was on her feet. Midoriya, I'm okay, he said, and his voice was strange, layered, 2 frequencies, one the voice he'd had this morning in the UA dormitory and one something older and vaster that had apparently always been living in the space between his ribs. The 2 powers stopped fighting. They recognized each other. It happened the way certain chemical reactions happen, not with explosion but with the quiet, definitive click of molecular alignment. One for All and the hollow inheritance didn't merge. They coexisted, in the way that 2 rivers entering the same ocean don't lose their names. They became something that had room for both of them, something the universe had apparently been saving space for without knowing why. The integration completed. Izuku opened his eyes. The room looked different. He could see everything in it on 3 levels simultaneously, the physical, the spiritual, the hollow space underneath reality where the true shape of things lived. He could feel Lost Noche's breathing. Could feel Halibel's Ryatsu like a deep current, powerful and controlled, and underneath the control something huge and protective and lonely. Could feel, at the very edge of his new range, the small presences that had been watching from the corridors, Halibel's remaining fraction, or what remained of what she'd assembled. Cautious. Curious. He looked at his arm. The white-blue covering had resolved into something elegant, not the rough integration armor of the process, but a clean formation, following the lines of his bone and muscle like it had been designed for him. At his palm, the fracture mask pattern had completed. It was not a hollow's mask. It was not a Shinigami's power. It was a symbol he'd never seen in any language and understood with absolute instinctive clarity. Hollow King. Well, said Halibel. She was studying him with an expression that was impossible to read except for one component, which was undeniable. You survived. Twice, Izuku said. Apparently. The look in your eyes is different. Is it bad different? She considered. It's king different. And she said it simply, without ceremony, like she was reporting weather. He stood. His body felt recalibrated, not heavier, not lighter, but more accurate, like a precision instrument that had been out of alignment for years and had finally been set right. One for all moved through him cleanly. The hollow inheritance moved beneath it like tidal pull. Between them, something new and nameless breathed. I need to understand what I am now, he said. Yes, she agreed. Will you help me? She was quiet for 3 seconds, Bakugo's duration, but with an entirely different weight. Then she said, I will tell you what I know. What you do with it is your decision. That's all I'm asking for. She nodded once, and it was the kind of nod that means something. The kind you give when you've decided something that can't be undecided. He nodded back. Outside Las Noches, the white desert stretched in every direction, and somewhere above it a sky that had never held stars began, for the first time in a very long time, to suggest the possibility of light. He found a room that night. Halibel indicated an unoccupied section of Las Noches with something between hospitality and efficiency, and he'd gathered that she'd been here alone long enough that the concept of guests required some mental recalibration on her part, but she managed it without visible difficulty. He lay on his back on the stone surface, cold, but his body was running warmer now, some metabolic effect of the integration, and stared at the ceiling and thought about All Might. Not with anger, not yet. With something more complicated than anger, the mixture you get when love and betrayal occupy the same sentence. All Might had given him everything. The power, the purpose, the belief that a boy without a quirk could become the greatest hero. Had sat with him on a rooftop when he was 14 and changed the fundamental physics of his life. And then, in a commission boardroom, had looked at data and said, the risk calculus has changed. Izuku pressed his palm flat against the stone. Felt the king's power hum. The thing was, and this was the part that lived in the quiet, under the hurt, under the complicated grief, he understood. He understood the calculation. He'd done versions of it himself, every time he'd assessed a battle scenario, every time he'd had to decide who to protect and who to risk. Rational decision-making in crisis conditions was a hero skill. He'd been taught it explicitly. The part that hurt wasn't the decision. The part that hurt was that none of them had come to him first. Not one. Not Yoruichi, who had been his first friend in this world. Not Ida, who made a principle of fairness. Not Bakugo, who had been rewriting his own calculations for 4 years. Not All Might, who had told him once, told him explicitly, sitting in the ruins of a collapsed building with blood on both their faces, I will always be with you, my boy. None of them had knocked on his door and said, Izuku. Something's happening. Let's figure it out together. They'd let the commission write the letter. He was going to have to do something about that. Not tonight. Tonight he was going to close his eyes in an alien desert in a ruined castle with his entire identity rebuilt around a power that had no name, with the faint sound of Halibel moving through the stone corridor somewhere nearby, unhurried, present, watching over something she'd apparently decided was worth watching over. He was going to sleep. Tomorrow he was going to learn what a Hollow King was. The night after that, he was going to start deciding what to do about the world that had thrown him away. He closed his eyes. One for All hummed. The hollow power breathed. Between them, the king's inheritance settled like a crown that had always been waiting for the right head. He slept without dreaming. The desert was quiet. For now. Chapter 2, The Desert Has a Throne. He woke to the sound of fighting. Not close, 300 meters at minimum, somewhere in the outer corridors of Las Noches, muffled by stone and distance. But loud enough that the sound traveled, and new enough to his expanded senses that he was sitting upright before he'd consciously decided to move. He sat still for a moment, reading it. 2 combatants. One was Halibel. He knew her Ryatsu now the way you know a voice, that deep ocean current pressure, controlled but not contained, like a dam that could stop holding back the water any time it chose to. The other was something smaller, faster, erratic in its spiritual signature in a way that felt less like instability and more like deliberate chaos. Moving in and out of engagement range with a speed that was genuinely impressive. And laughing. He could hear the laughing from here. He found them in what had once been a training courtyard, a vast stone space open to the night sky, white sand floor, the walls high enough that the sky above was a rectangle of artificial black. Halibel stood near the center, sword drawn, watching with narrowed eyes as a figure in a white dress cartwheeled across the sand and came up grinning. The figure was short. Green hair in low twin tails. Brown skin and a face that was simultaneously childlike and ancient in the way that only things which had been through genuine transformation could manage. A fragment of hollow mask curved from the left side of her face. Her Ryatsu, now that he was in range of it, was interesting. There was a larger signature underneath the smaller one, like a second heartbeat, deeper and stronger, sitting below the surface of what she was currently using the way an iceberg sits below the waterline. "You're slower than last time," the figure announced cheerfully. Halibel-san, have you been skipping training? Ichigo would be very disappointed. "I'm not slower," Halibel said, with extraordinary patience. "You're telegraphing less." "That's the same thing from my side." A delighted spin. Oh, there's someone watching." The green-haired figure whipped around and fixed enormous dark eyes on Izuku with the absolute unguarded enthusiasm of someone who hadn't learned to perform indifference yet. "Who is that?" "He smells interesting." "He smells like a hollow but not like a hollow and also like something else and also," a pause. "Are you a new fraction?" "You don't look like a fraction. You look like a confused puppy." "Nell," Halibel said. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," Izuku said. "I'm not a fraction." The figure, Nell, tilted her head at an angle that suggested her neck had opinions about conventional geometry. "What are you then?" "Still working on the vocabulary for that." She beamed at him like this was the best possible answer. Then she was across the courtyard in a movement that technically fell under the category of running but bore the same relationship to normal running that lightning bore to a light switch, there and then there, with the steps implied rather than observed. She stopped 2 feet away and stared up at him with her hands clasped behind her back. "Nilil tuo delschwank," she said formally, and then immediately dropped the formality like a coat she tried on and decided wasn't hers. "But Nell is fine. I've known Halibel-san for a very long time. She doesn't let just anyone sleep in Las Noches." A significant look. The last person she let stay was Emilu before, something flickered across her face, quick and dark. Gone before it could be named. "Well. Anyway. What happened to your arm?" He looked at his right arm. In the daylight, or Hueco Mundo's equivalent, the flat white luminescence that came from nowhere and illuminated everything equally, the king's inheritance was more visible. The white-blue formation followed his forearm to the elbow, and the fracture pattern at his palm had a faint iridescence that shifted with his Ryatsu output. "Integration," he said. "A hollow fell through a rift with me and we ended up, sharing space." Nell's eyes went wide. "And you survived?" Apparently I wanted to live more than I wanted to stay the same. She stared at him for a long moment with an expression that had gone from delighted to something more careful, more measuring. Then she looked at Halibel over his shoulder. Some communication passed between them, old and wordless, the kind built by years of shared context. "Breakfast," Halibel said, sheathing her sword. "Then training." Breakfast in Hueco Mundo was an experience Izuku filed under adjust expectations and continue. The food was real, or real adjacent, and Nell ate with the enthusiastic efficiency of someone who treated meals as a competitive sport. Halibel ate methodically. Izuku ate and tried to parse the conversation happening around him, which moved between Hueco Mundo politics, Arrancar's sociology, and Nell's impressions of 3 separate places she'd apparently visited in the human world, all of which she described primarily in terms of what food she'd found there. "The thing about Soul Society," Nell said, waving her chopsticks with authority, "is that they keep building the hierarchy higher instead of wider. Every time something threatens the structure they add another level rather than question whether the structure is the problem." She popped a piece of something into her mouth. Aizen did the same thing from the other direction. Built his pyramid from the bottom up and put himself at the top and called it revolution. A considering tilt of her head. It wasn't revolution. It was just a taller pyramid. "Nell has opinions about power structures," Halibel said, in the tone of someone who has heard these opinions before and found them, after consideration, reasonable. "I have experience with power structures," Nell corrected. "I was Trace Espada." "You think I got that by not paying attention?" She turned to Izuku. "What was it like? Your hero society. Who was at the top?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "The commission," he said. "And above them, public opinion. The top of the pyramid was whatever the public believed heroes should be." "So the structure was built on perception," Nell said. "Partly. That's the most fragile kind." She said it without satisfaction, just observational. "Perception shifts. A pyramid built on it shifts with it. Anyone at the top has to spend all their energy maintaining the image rather than doing the actual work." Izuku was quiet for a moment. He thought about All Might's skeletal form, carefully hidden. Thought about the smile maintained at enormous cost. "Yeah," he said. Yeah. Nell looked at him with those dark ancient and young eyes. "You're angry," she said. Not accusatory. Just noting it. "I'm working on what to do with it." "That's the right order," she said approvingly. "Most people do it backwards." She refilled his cup with something that tasted like mineral water and distant thunder. "Anger first, action second, understanding somewhere in the middle where it doesn't get in the way of the other two." "Nell," Halibel said quietly, "he lost a great deal yesterday." "I know." Nell's voice was gentler than its usual register. "I lost a great deal too, once. I know what it looks like in someone's shoulders." She met Izuku's eyes directly. "It gets lighter. Not because you forget. Because you build something else to carry alongside it, and eventually the new weight redistributes the old." He thought about that for a moment. "What did you build?" he asked. She smiled, and it was a different smile from the courtyard grin, older, realer, something that had been tested and held. "I'll tell you when I know you better." Halibel's training philosophy was built on 2 principles. First, understand the nature of what you have before you attempt to use it. Second, never confuse power with capacity, because they are not the same thing and the difference will kill you. She laid this out in the courtyard after breakfast with the concise clarity of someone who had been teaching for a very long time, and Izuku recognized in her approach the same pedagogical bones as Aizawa's, the refusal to pad the lesson with encouragement, the trust that the student could handle direct information. "Hollow power operates on spiritual pressure," she said. "Its fundamental nature is consumption. It builds itself by taking in external ryatsu and converting it. This is why hollows hunt souls. Not purely appetite. Survival. One for all accumulates power in a similar way," Izuku said. Each bearer adds to it. Halibel nodded. They're structurally compatible, which is why the integration didn't destroy you. But one for all accumulates linearly. Hollow power accumulates exponentially when given sufficient input. She looked at him carefully. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That I need to be careful about how much I take in. I'm telling you that you are the first entity I have ever encountered that could theoretically become limitless. She said it flatly, without drama. The predecessor quirks provide anchoring points, cognitive and emotional memories that give the exponential accumulation a framework. Without that framework, hollow power at sufficient scale becomes consuming rather than protective. A pause. You understand the difference. I don't want to consume, he said immediately. I know. And she said it the same way she'd said it last night, simply, with the certainty of observation rather than hope. Nell was sitting on the courtyard wall, watching with her chin in her hands. Show him Resurrection, she called down. Halibel glanced up at her. He needs to see what the integration can move toward, Nell said reasonably. He's going to develop his own version eventually. Better he sees the template first. Something passed between them again, that old wordless communication. Then Halibel's Ryatsu shifted, opened, the way a sealed room opens when every lock is undone simultaneously. The pressure that resulted was enormous and immediate. The sand in the courtyard lifted. The air took on the smell of deep ocean and storm pressure. She said the word. Arise, Tiburon. The transformation was swift and absolute. The massive blade, the helmet, the alteration of her form into something that was still recognizably Halibel but was also the ocean given shape, it lasted only a moment. Long enough for Izuku to take it in, to feel the Ryatsu at its full unfiltered scale, to understand what released looked like. Then she pulled it back. Contained it again. As smooth and deliberate as closing a hand. The courtyard sand settled. Izuku exhaled slowly. One for All had responded to the Ryatsu display, not aggressively, but with a kind of reciprocal recognition. Two powers acknowledging each other. The hollow inheritance in his palm had hummed. What does your release feel like? Halibel asked. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I haven't tried. Don't, she said, and she said it quickly enough that he realized it was reflexive, protective rather than restrictive. She caught herself. Not yet. Not until you understand the scope. How do I understand the scope without testing it? By meditating on the architecture first. She walked toward him. Sit. Close your eyes. He sat in the sand. One for All lives in your blood, she said, her voice settling into something quieter. Find it. He found it easily. He'd been able to find it since he was 16, that warm lightning presence in every cell, the accumulated strength of 7 people who had chosen to give rather than keep. He held it in his awareness. Below it, Halibel said. The other thing. He went deeper. Past One for All, past the physical, into the space that had been built overnight during the integration. It was there, vast and cold and patient in the way that geology is patient, in the way that the sea is patient, in the way that things that have existed since before civilization have simply stopped noticing time. I can feel it, he said quietly. Don't pull it. Don't push it. Just observe the edges. He observed. The hollow inheritance was large. Larger than he'd expected, even after everything Halibel had told him. He tried to map it and found he couldn't, the way you can't map the ocean from a boat. He could feel the edges in some directions but not others. He could feel it pressing against One for All's boundaries with something that wasn't aggression but was definitely awareness. And beneath the hollow inheritance, deeper still, something he hadn't noticed last night because last night he'd been surviving rather than listening, a third thing. Smaller than the other two, currently. But with a quality that was distinct from both, neither the warm lightning of One for All nor the cold patience of the hollow power. Something that was both of those things processed through a third filter. Something with its own voice. He opened his eyes. There are three, he said. Halibel went very still. One for all, the hollow inheritance, and something else, he said. Something new. Something that came from the other two meeting. Nell had dropped off the wall and was standing behind Halibel now, and her expression was the most serious he'd seen it, the ancient quality in her face forward rather than submerged. The Hollow King's power, Nell said quietly. Properly. The other two are the parents. That's the child. How do you know that term? Halibel asked her. Because I'm Trace Espada and I've been alive for a very long time and I read everything Aizen collected before he stopped being relevant. Nell's eyes were on Izuku. There are legends. Old ones, older than Soul Society's current organizational structure. About what happens when a being with both living spiritual power and hollow resonance doesn't break under the integration. She paused. The legends say it happens maybe once every few thousand years. That the entity that results exists outside the hierarchy of every established power. That it answers to no king, no court, no soul king. Silence. The legends also say, Nell continued, that the last one tried to remake the world and it took a coalition of Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the Quincy to bring him down. She looked at him steadily. I don't think you're going to try to remake the world. No, Izuku said. I know. I said I don't think it. A slight smile. I'm still forming the opinion. Nell. A soft warning from Halibel. I'm being honest, Nell said reasonably. That's more respectful than telling him what he wants to hear. She looked at Izuku. The legends also say the Hollow King's power is fundamentally protective in its base expression. That it builds a domain. That things within the domain are anchored. Stabilized. A pause. The old texts described it as, the king does not rule subjects. The king is the ground beneath their feet. Izuku sat with that for a long moment. The ground beneath their feet. He thought about 16 years of running toward danger. About the instinct that had never been about glory or recognition or the symbol of a smile, the instinct that had always been, at its most basic, I need to make sure everyone gets out of this okay. Not the protagonist's instinct. The protector's instinct. Maybe, he thought, the power had always known what it was for. They fell into a rhythm over the following days that was less structured than a curriculum and more organic than habit, something between the two, shaped by what each of them needed and what the others could provide. Halibel taught him the architecture of spiritual combat. Not just technique but philosophy, the difference between fighting to defeat and fighting to end, the way Ryatsu could be weaponized not through explosive output but through precision control, the surgical application of overwhelming force. She was the best teacher he'd ever encountered except possibly Aizawa, and the reason was the same for both of them, she taught by showing him exactly what he was doing wrong. Nell was a different kind of education. She fought him in the mornings with a joyful ruthlessness that tested different things, adaptability, instinct response, the ability to track an enemy whose combat style was built on making patterns and then violating them. She was faster than anything he'd fought. He couldn't land a hit on her for the first 3 days. You're thinking too much, she told him cheerfully, dodging his combination strike and appearing behind him. Your brain runs ahead of your body and your body slows down to wait for it. Most fighters think before they move, he said, turning. Most fighters aren't trying to hit me. She was in front of him again, grinning. I'm not fighting your plan. I'm fighting the gap between your plan and your execution. Close the gap. He lunged. She sidestepped. He felt the motion coming and adjusted mid-execution, not with thought but below thought, with the part of him that one for all had been training for 4 years and the hollow inheritance had apparently been filing as relevant data. His elbow caught her shoulder. She stumbled 1 step. Caught herself. Turned to look at him with an expression of pure delight. There you are, she said. He was breathing hard. She wasn't. You let me hit you. I let you get close enough to hit me, she said. You did the hitting. She touched her shoulder, not rubbing it, just confirming. That's going to bruise. She sounded pleased about this. Halibel, watching from the wall with her arms folded, said nothing. But the quality of her silence had changed. On the 5th day, he asked Halibel to spar with him. Not training. Not demonstration. Spar. She looked at him for a moment with that unreadable evaluative gaze, and he held it steadily, and she said, all right. They went to the center of the courtyard. She didn't hold back. That was the first thing he noticed. She came at him at genuine speed, her Ryatsu a wall that hit him before her sword did, and the sword itself moved in patterns he had to process through his expanded perception just to track, let alone respond to. He lasted 4 minutes before she disarmed him. Again, he said. 7 minutes the second time. She found a gap between his one-for-all output and his hollow power response, a half-second window where his body was handling the transition between the two systems, and exploited it with surgical precision. You're switching consciously, she said, standing over him. You think about which system to use. Stop deciding. Let them decide together. They're different, he said, sitting up. They have different language. Different, they're both yours, she said. They don't need a translator. They need you to stop playing interpreter and get out of the way. He stood. Looked at his hands. Felt the two powers in him, the lightning and the tide, and tried to do what she was describing, tried to step back from the management of them and just, again, he said. This time he stopped thinking about which system was responding to what. He stopped categorizing. He let one for all and the hollow inheritance do what they'd apparently been practicing while he slept, coordinate without him micromanaging the conversation. The result was something new. When Halibel's next strike came, he didn't block it with either system alone. The response that came out of him was a composite, one for all's precision and force meeting the hollow power's breadth and depth and doing it simultaneously rather than sequentially. Her Ryatsu met something it wasn't expecting, something that matched her pressure not by overpowering it but by finding its wavelength and harmonizing with it, and for a fraction of a second her advance stalled. He moved through the gap. He didn't land the hit. She adjusted too quickly. But she had to use full speed to do it, and that was different from the first 2 rounds. Her eyes had changed. Something in them that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it, the expression of someone recalculating. Better, she said. Which from Halibel was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Nell, from the wall, let out a whoop that echoed off every surface in the courtyard. That evening, he found Halibel sitting on the outer wall of Las Noches, looking out at the white desert. The sky above Hueco Mundo had a quality he'd been studying since his arrival, not dark exactly but deep, and in the depths of it, if you watched long enough, you could see movement. Shapes at the edge of definition. He sat beside her. She didn't look at him. You'll be ready to test the king's release within 2 weeks, she said. Is that your professional estimate or your gut feeling? In my experience, those aren't different things. She was quiet for a moment. The composite response today was real. That's the foundational condition. For what? For survival. When people come for you, and people will come for you, Midoriya, the composite response is what keeps you alive. Individual mastery of 2 separate systems isn't enough when the person coming for you is trying to kill one version of you while the other is distracted. She looked at him sideways. They'll know what you are. The rumors will travel. They always do. The Commission, he said. Soul Society, she said. The Quincy remnants. Anyone who benefits from the established hierarchy will feel what you are as a direct threat to the structure that benefits them. A pause. My experience with established hierarchies is that they prefer to neutralize threats before those threats understand their own scope. You're telling me to move faster than they're comfortable with. I'm telling you to understand yourself before they define you. She turned to look at him directly, and in the white desert light her sea glass eyes had depth in them that went further down than he could currently follow. They will call you a weapon. A bomb. A hollow. They will use whatever language makes you something to contain rather than someone to answer to. A beat. Don't let them name you before you name yourself. He met her gaze and held it. What do you call yourself? He asked. After everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the desert wind came and went twice. A protector who survived her failure, she said. Who is deciding whether surviving means starting again or standing still? She looked back at the desert. I haven't finished deciding. For what it's worth, he said carefully, from where I'm standing, you've been doing a lot of starting again already. He thought about the training, the food, the steady presence in the courtyard, the instruction delivered without condescension or performance. Whether you've named it that or not. She was very still for a moment. Then she said, quietly, go to sleep, Midoriya. He went. But he was almost back to the corridor entrance when she said, without turning, Izuku. He stopped. That's what I'll call you, she said. If that's acceptable. He smiled at her back. Yeah, he said. That's acceptable. Nell found him at breakfast the next morning with her eyes bright and her energy at a level that suggested she hadn't slept, or possibly had slept for 12 hours and was simply running on the surplus. I need to tell you something, she said, dropping into the seat across from him with the contained urgency of someone who has been waiting to say a specific thing and has finally reached the correct moment. Okay, he said. I wasn't always like this. She gestured at herself, the small frame, the twin tails, the fragment of mask. I used to be larger. Stronger. My full Ryatsu is, she paused, and her expression did the thing it sometimes did where the ancient quality surfaced fully. It's substantial. I can feel the second signature under yours, he said. I've been able to feel it since I met you. She blinked. You can already feel that? The king's perception. It reads spiritual architecture, not just output. She stared at him for a moment with a new quality of attention. Well. Then you know I'm not being modest. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I had my form reduced by Noitora. It wasn't a gradual process, it was, sudden. Violent. I lost the upper part of myself all at once and the piece that was left had to build a shell to survive. She said it simply, without self-pity, but with the precision of someone who has processed a thing so thoroughly they can now carry it without flinching. The child form isn't me. It's the shelter I built when there wasn't anything else. Can you go back? I could. She paused. It requires trusting that the thing I built the shelter against isn't going to happen again. Trusting that I'm in a place where full power doesn't make me a target. She was looking at him with something direct and evaluating. I haven't been in a place like that for a long time. He understood what she was asking without her asking it. This place, he said. Las Noches. Whatever we're building here, I'm not going to make you a target. I'm not going to use your power. I'm not, I know, she said, and she said it the same way Halibel had said it. That quiet certainty of observation. That's why I'm telling you. She picked up her chopsticks. I wanted you to know what's under the surface. Before whatever comes next. Something's coming next, he said. Not a question. Something's always coming next. She speared a piece of food with cheerful precision. The interesting question is whether we're ready for it. What came next arrived on the 9th day. He felt it first, a pressure at the edge of his extended perception, directional, coming from above and slightly east of Las Noches. Approaching. Not hollow, not Arankar, not the specific spiritual texture of Hueco Mundo. Human spiritual energy, wrapped in hero training discipline and something personal underneath it that his new perception read with uncomfortable clarity. Anger. Determination. Grief, tightly controlled. And underneath all of it, something almost like hope that was being actively suppressed because it was inconvenient. He knew who it was before he saw them. He was on the outer wall of Las Noches when the Garganta opened above the desert. Two figures dropped through it on platforms of spiritual energy, landed in the sand 200 meters out, and looked up at the wall. Bakugo Katsuki. In civilian gear, not his hero costume, which meant this wasn't official. Which meant he'd come on his own. Beside him, Todoroki Shoto, expression unreadable as always. Izuku stood on the wall and looked down at them and felt the composite power in him respond to his heightened emotional state, not with aggression but with the settling quality, the domain instinct, the ground beneath their feet response. Las Noches breathed. The sand around the two arrivals shifted fractionally. Bakugo looked up at him. "You look different," Bakugo said. He said it without the usual inflection, no contempt, no challenge. Just an observation from someone who had been paying close enough attention to notice change. 9 days will do that, Izuku said. 9 days in Hueco Mundo specifically. Bakugo's eyes moved over the wall, over the castle behind it, over the Ryatsu landscape in ways that suggested he had at least some spiritual perception, which Izuku filed as relevant new information. Then back to Izuku. "We need to talk." "You had my door," Izuku said. "You had my number. You had 4 years of me being in the room next to yours." His voice was even. "You had 1,000 chances to talk, Kaken, before the commission wrote a letter." Bakugo's jaw was tight. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Which was, not what Izuku had expected. He'd expected an argument. A defensive counter. The Bakugo machinery of justification working at full speed. The flat acknowledgement landed differently, left him without the counterarguments he'd been quietly building for 9 days. Todoroki spoke. "The commission has escalated," he said, calm and direct. "They're not waiting for Friday. They moved the timeline up. There's a retrieval team being assembled." "Retrieval," Izuku said. "That's what they're calling it." From behind him, on the inner wall, Halibel had arrived silently. He could feel her without looking, that deep ocean presence, steady and watchful. Not intervening. Giving him the space to handle this himself, but present. "Who else is coming?" he asked Todoroki. "We don't know the full team." A pause. "They're using quirk suppressant technology. Commission grade." Another pause, infinitesimally shorter. "Specifically designed for One for All's energy signature." "Then they don't know what's here," Izuku said. Bakugo's eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" Izuku stepped off the wall. He dropped the 20 meters without One for All and landed in the sand without impact, the hollow power absorbing the fall not with dramatic effect but with simple, quiet efficiency. He stood and looked at Bakugo at ground level, and watched Bakugo's expression process what his eyes were telling him. "It means," Izuku said, "that what they were afraid of back home is about 30% of what I am now." He met Bakugo's red eyes steadily. "So their suppressant technology is measuring for the wrong frequency." Bakugo stared at him. Something moved in his face, complex, multilayered, working through surprise and concern and something that might have been, underneath both, a reluctant and honest awe. "How?" he said. "There was a hollow," Izuku said. "And a rift. And a choice. A choice to live more than I wanted to stay the same." He held Bakugo's gaze. "You said I was a bomb that didn't know it was ticking. You were right. I didn't know." He let a breath out. "I know now." The desert was very quiet. "Why are you here?" Izuku asked them both. "Honestly. Not the commission's reason. Your reason." Bakugo held his gaze for a long time. The 3 seconds came and went. "Because I made the wrong call," he said. "I ran the risk calculus and I got the answer right and the decision wrong and he stopped. Started again. I told them you were a bomb. I didn't tell them you were also the only person I've ever met who would go off in exactly the right direction every single time. A pause. That's, the part one left out was relevant. Izuku stood there in the white sand of Hueco Mundo with the Hollow King's inheritance in his blood and the weight of 9 days sitting in his chest and Bakugo Katsuki in front of him saying, in Bakugo's particular language, I was wrong, and felt something that was very complicated and very human and had nothing to do with any of the 3 powers currently living in his body. They're still coming, Todoroki said quietly. I know, Izuku said. What are you going to do? He looked at the desert. Felt Las Noches behind him. Felt Halibel on the wall, steady as tide. Felt Nell's Ryatsu from somewhere inside the castle, both signatures of her, the surface and the depth. I'm going to be ready, he said. And I'm going to give them the chance to see me clearly before I decide what ready means. He looked back at Bakugo. How long do we have? 4 days. Maybe 5. Then you should come inside, Izuku said. He glanced back at the wall, at Halibel's silhouette. She gave nothing in expression, but she stepped back from the wall edge, which was, he'd learned, her form of yes. He looked at Bakugo and Todoroki. And you should see what a bomb looks like when it finally understands itself, he said. He turned and walked back toward Las Noches. After a moment, he heard 2 sets of footsteps following him through the white sand, and the sound of it was complicated and familiar and, underneath everything else, a relief he hadn't admitted he was waiting for. Above them, the artificial sky of Hueco Mundo pressed down, vast and dark and utterly indifferent to all of it. Inside the castle, Nell's Ryatsu flickered, both signatures, surface and depth, moving closer to the same frequency than they'd been in years. Small things. But in a place where everything had been still for too long, small things were how new worlds started. Chapter 3, The Cat Who Wouldn't Be Caught. She felt it from Karakura town. That was the part that got her attention first, not that there was a new power signature in Hueco Mundo, because there were always power signatures in Hueco Mundo, the place practically generated them the way weather systems generated pressure fronts. What got her attention was that she felt it from Karakura town, standing in Kisuke's basement at 2 in the morning arguing about something she'd already forgotten, and the feeling had arrived not as an alarm but as a question. What are you? Not threatening. Not aggressive. Curious, in the way that very large, very old things are curious, with patience rather than urgency, with the quality of something that had learned to wait because time was no longer a pressure. Yoruichi Shihoin had been doing this long enough that she trusted her instincts on a cellular level. When something in the spiritual landscape asked her a question, she went to find the answer. Something's in Hueco Mundo, she said, interrupting Kisuke mid-sentence. Kisuke Urahara paused. Tilted his striped hat. Reached into his sleeve for his denryashinki with the unhurried movements of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that conversations with Yoruichi rarely ended where they started. He looked at the reading. Then he looked at it again. He said. That's not a reassuring sound. No, he agreed. It isn't. He studied the device for another moment. The base signature is human. Alive. Modified, but, the modification isn't natural. It's an integration event. Integration as in someone fell through a rift into Hueco Mundo with a hollow and came out the other side as something new. He looked up. Which shouldn't be possible. And yet. He tucked the denryashinki away. The deeper signature is, he paused again. She knew Kisuke's pauses. He had several varieties. This one was the kind where he was calculating whether to say the whole truth or the convenient portion of it. It's resonant with something in the old records. Something pre-Soul Society. Kisuke. Hollow King, he said. It's theoretical. I thought it was theoretical. He picked up his fan. I may need to revise my understanding of theoretical. She was already moving toward the Garganta array. Yoruichi. His voice was careful. The careful voice was worse than the cheerful one. Be cautious. We don't know the entity's alignment. I never know anyone's alignment when I first meet them, she said. Hasn't killed me yet. There's always a first time. She was already through. She came out of the Garganta 2 kilometers from Las Noches at a velocity she didn't bother moderating and immediately felt the domain. That was the word for it, domain. Not territory, not Ryatsu projection, not the assertive boundary marking that powerful spiritual entities use to announce themselves. It was something subtler and more absolute. Like the air pressure changing when you enter a building from outside. Like standing on ground that knows you're standing on it and has decided, without visible process, that you belong there. She stopped moving. Which was notable because stopping had never been one of Yoruichi's default settings. The domain wasn't threatening. It wasn't anything, really, except aware. It noticed her the way a mountain notices weather, comprehensively, without judgment. She had the distinct and slightly unsettling sensation of being read at a depth she hadn't authorized. She pushed back with her own Ryatsu. Reflexive. Professional. I see you seeing me and I want you to know I can see you back. The domain's awareness shifted, not retreating, not pressing harder, but adjusting its quality. Like someone turning to face you in a conversation instead of watching from the side. Then, from the wall of Las Noches, which was not as far away as 2 kilometers should have made it look, a figure stood up. She had excellent eyes. Even she needed a moment to parse the distance. Young. Dark hair. Standing with a stillness that looked learned rather than natural, the particular stillness of someone who had been in motion for so long that being still was the thing they'd had to practice. He looked directly at her. From 2 kilometers away. Interesting, she said to herself. She shunpoed. She covered the distance in 4 steps and came in fast, not attacking but not slowing either, arriving at the top of the wall in the space between one breath and the next, and the young man was still there, still looking at her, tracking her movement with eyes that were green and luminous and did something complicated when she arrived that she filed as significant. Behind him, Halibel. Yoruichi's attention split between them in the practiced way of someone whose survival had always depended on assessing multiple threats simultaneously. Halibel she knew, or knew of, which in Yoruichi's experience was sometimes more accurate than knowing directly. Tres Espada. Post Eisen, surviving and intact, which given everything meant she was either very strong or very smart or, most likely, both. The young man she did not know. She read his Ryatsu in the fraction of the second it took her to stop moving and it was, layered. Warm lightning wrapped around cold tidal force wrapped around something that had no comparative reference in her considerable catalogue of spiritual signatures. Hollow King, she said. Not a question. Just confirming Kisuk's assessment. That's what they're calling it, the young man said. I'm still working on what I call it. He paused. Izuku Midoriya. Yoruichi Shihoin. She looked him over, openly, because she didn't perform indifference for anyone, it had always seemed like a waste of time. Green eyes, lean build, hands that had been broken and healed and broken again enough times to have a different geography from normal hands. Standing in white sand in Hueco Mundo with a power that had no precedent, looking at her with a directness that most people about a third of her age and a fraction of her experience didn't manage. You felt me coming. About 30 seconds before you arrived, he said. How far out? 2 kilometers. Little more. She raised her eyebrows. That was, yes, that was significant. Her Shuanpa at full velocity left a spiritual trace of approximately 1/100th of a second. For him to have felt her approach at 2 kilometers at that speed, his perception radius was something she was going to need to take seriously. You're a long way from home, she said. Something moved through his expression. Quick, controlled, but she was very good at reading what people controlled. Yeah, he said. I am. Hero, she said. Former. The commission's classification. You did your homework. I always do my homework. She glanced at Halibel. "Hello, Halibel." "Yoruichi," Halibel said, with the specific neutrality of someone deciding, in real time, how much neutrality was actually appropriate. "I'm going to need to be inside your domain," Yoruichi said to Izuku. "Properly. To understand what you are. Which means I need to know whether you're a threat. To whom? To anyone I care about." He looked at her steadily. "I was expelled from hero training for having power that was getting too big to control," he said. "I fell into Hueco Mundo and integrated with a hollow and became something that doesn't fit into anyone's existing hierarchy. The commission is sending a retrieval team in," he glanced at Halibel fractionally, 3 days now. "I have 2 former classmates inside this building who came to warn me about it. And the first thing I've done with 10 days of rapidly expanding power is train and try to understand it." He tilted his head slightly. "Does that answer your question?" "Partially." She crossed her arms. "What do you want?" "Right now? To be left alone to finish becoming what I'm becoming before someone tries to stop me." A pause. "After that, I want to go home. I want to make it so that when I do, they can't write another letter." "By force?" "By being undeniable," he said. "Not the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment. The Hollow King's domain pressed against her awareness, ground quality, stable, with that unsettling deep warmth underneath it. She thought about Kisuke's careful voice saying be cautious and thought about the 17 times she'd ignored Kisuke's caution and come out better for it on 15 of those occasions. "All right," she said. "Show me around." The inside of Las Noches was different from her last visit, which had been during the Winter War and had primarily involved moving at speed through corridors trying not to die. The current version had the quality of a space that was slowly being reoccupied, not renovated, not restored, but breathed into again after long stillness. Izuku walked beside her at an easy pace. She noted that he didn't narrate, didn't fill the space with information or justification, didn't perform comfort or confidence. He moved through Las Noches the way someone moves through a space they're starting to understand as theirs, and he let her look at everything she wanted to look at without commentary. She appreciated that. She appreciated it enough that she decided to stop being professionally detached about it. "Kisuke says the Hollow King designation appears in pre-Soul Society texts," she said. "That the last known case was a coalition event." "Nell told me," he said. "Nell's here." She looked around with genuine surprise. "Third room on the left from the east corridor. She's teaching Bakugo and Todoroki about Hueco Mundo geography and I think it's mostly an excuse to annoy Bakugo." From the direction of the east corridor, faintly audible, came the sound of Nell's delighted explanation of something and Bakugo's voice saying I don't care about the geological formation of spiritual sand, woman. Yoruichi almost smiled. "Your former classmates," she said. "Bakugo came to warn me. Todoroki came because Bakugo did, which is about as much as Todoroki will ever admit to caring about something." He paused. "They're not staying. When the retrieval team gets close, they need to be back in the human world. Plausible deniability. Their futures," he corrected. "I'm not making them choose." She thought about that. About the precision in how he'd said it, their futures, like he'd already fully accounted for the cost of making this his own problem and had no intention of spreading it. "You're protecting them," she said. "The people who sold you out." "I'm protecting their options," he said. "Different thing." "Is it?" He was quiet for a moment. Halibel's fraction chose to protect her. They didn't give her a bill for it afterward. He said it simply. "That's what protection means. If it comes with conditions, it's leverage." She stopped walking. He noticed after 2 steps and turned to look at her. "That's a very old principle for someone who looks about 16, she said. "I'm 17, he said. "And it's not old. It's just, I don't know. Something I figured out." He seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention, which she found interesting. The discomfort wasn't false modesty. It was genuine. He hadn't said it to be impressive. He'd said it because it was true, and the conversation had arrived at the point where the true thing was the relevant thing. She started walking again. "I'll stay," she said. "Until the retrieval team arrives. I want to see what you do about it." "You're not offering to help." "I'm offering to observe." She slid her hands into her sleeves. "Whether that becomes help depends on what I observe." "Fair enough," he said. "Most people would argue with that." "Most people," he said, "haven't spent 10 days being trained by Halibel and Nell. I've had extensive recent education in what it looks like when someone respects your agency." He glanced at her sideways, quick and direct. "I'm not going to do to you what was done to me." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, back to the corridor ahead. "I'll want to spar," she said. "Before the retrieval team. I need to understand your combat range." "I was going to suggest it," he said. They sparred the next morning. She didn't announce it. She simply appeared in the training courtyard when he was already there, running through forms, something between hero combat stances and the beginnings of a hollow-adapted fighting style, the two systems merging into something that had his specific physical grammar. She watched him for a few minutes from the wall and then dropped into the courtyard and hit him from behind at 50% speed. He pivoted. Blocked. The block was good, genuinely good, the composite power she'd felt at a distance now visible up close, one for all structural strength carrying the hollow power's adaptive quality. But the response was half a beat slow, because he hadn't expected her. "Combat awareness," she said, landing back from the block. "You project your perception outward, but you stopped checking at close range." "Because I was watching the corridors, and I came through the wall." She smiled at him. Not her teasing smile. The real one. Close range is the hardest range for people with extended perception. You rely on the distance warning and forget that someone fast enough doesn't need the distance. He looked at her. "Are you teaching me?" "I'm annoying you at high velocity," she said. "Sometimes those are the same thing. Come on." She came at him again, faster this time, and this round he was ready. The perception field dropped to close range the moment she moved, tracking her at a scale that forced her to change vectors twice in the first second. She hadn't needed to change vectors in a spar in approximately 40 years. She came in under his guard and tagged his ribs. He caught her wrist. Not slow, quick, reflexive, the composite response she'd heard Halibel mention. His grip had force behind it, not trying to hurt but absolutely trying to hold, and for a fraction of a second she felt the Hollow King's domain at contact range, which was a qualitatively different experience from feeling it at distance. Like touching the foundation of a building and feeling how deep the roots went. She phased out of his grip with a shunpa so short it was barely more than a step sideways, and he let it happen. He felt her intent to release and released the counter rather than escalating. That was interesting. "You felt my intent," she said. "At contact range, I can read Ryatsu texture closely enough to, yes." He was breathing harder. "It felt like you were going to. If you'd held that grip, what would you have done?" He paused. "Let go," he said. "When you wanted to be let go. What if I was an enemy?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I'd have held longer. A beat. But I'd still have let go when the fight was done." She circled him. He tracked her, close-range perception up and running now, not dropping it for the wider field but maintaining both simultaneously. She noted the slight shimmer at his right arm, the king's armor responding to sustained combat state. His posture was changing subtly, settling lower, widening his center. "You compensate left," she said. "Your right arm, the armored one, you use it for defense more than offense. Because you're still not fully trusting the new formation. It's only been 10 days. It's been your arm for its entire existence," she said. "Trust it." She flashed left, came right, went for his center, and he met her with his right arm forward, the king's armor flaring, and she felt the composite power at full expression for the first time. It stopped her. Not with force. With harmonization. Her Ryatsu met the king's domain at his arm, and the domain did that thing it did, that ground beneath your feet thing, and for one full second her Shunpa impulse simply didn't fire because there was nowhere more stable to be than where she currently was. She stood very still. He stood very still. They were 6 inches apart. "Sorry," he said, immediately. "I didn't mean to, don't apologize for winning," she said. "I didn't win. You stopped me," she said. At full speed. With a defensive posture. She stepped back, reassessing with the fresh eyes of someone who has just received genuinely new information about the landscape. "What does that feel like from your side?" "Warm," he said, after a moment. "Like, it's not trying to stop you. It's trying to include you." He looked at his arm. The armor was settling back to its ambient state, the shimmer fading. The domain doesn't push. It pulls everything inside it toward stability. Toward the same level. "Like a foundation," she said. He looked at her. "Halibel said it last night. The ground beneath their feet. She's right." She had a look in her expression now that she recognized as the particular quality of genuine interest, the kind that didn't come from professional obligation or strategic calculation. Just actual, honest fascination. "In 1600 years, I've never encountered a combat capability that operates on that principle. Is it useful?" She thought about that seriously rather than reflexively. In direct combat, it depends on the enemy. Against someone who fights with force, it's devastating. Against someone who fights with, she paused. Against someone like me, it requires a different application. You can't use it offensively the way you'd use a strike. What would you use it for? Protection, she said. Wide area. Everything within your domain range would be anchored. Stabilized. Hard to harm, hard to destabilize. She looked at him. Which means in the retrieval team scenario, your most effective use of the king's power isn't fighting them. He was quiet. It's making their suppressant technology irrelevant by changing what the ground they're standing on does, she said. Something clicked in his expression. She could see it, the moment the strategic possibility landed, when the pieces assembled. He looked at the courtyard. At the sand. At Las Noches. The domain extends as my power does, he said. How large can you make it? I don't know yet. He looked at her. How do I find out without testing it somewhere that matters? She smiled. This time it was the teasing one, which surprised her because she hadn't decided to deploy it. I have a few ideas, she said. None of them are safe. Those are my favorite kind, he said immediately, and she laughed, an actual laugh, not performed, not social, and he looked startled by it for a half-second before something in his expression settled into something that was quiet and warm and that she was not going to examine too carefully right now. Come on, she said. I'll show you what peripheral domain extension looks like in practice. She started toward the outer wall. Try to keep up. You're going to Shunpa away immediately, he said, following. Obviously. That's not teaching, that's hazing. It's both, she said cheerfully. They're not mutually exclusive. From behind them, Nell's voice floated down the corridor. She likes him already, I can tell by the laugh. Yoruichi kept walking, expressionless. Which meant nothing, because her expression had never been a reliable indicator of what was happening underneath it. Nell cornered her that evening. Yoruichi had found a section of Las Noches outer rampart that caught the ambient light at an angle she found pleasant as anything in this place managed, and was sitting with her legs over the edge watching the white desert, and Nell dropped down beside her with the cheerful territorial confidence of someone who had decided this was now a two-person spot. He's extraordinary, Nell said. Not as a challenge. Just as a fact. He's interesting, Yoruichi said. That's a compliment from you, which means extraordinary. Nell pulled her knees up. You haven't sat still voluntarily in the time I've known you. I sit still all the time. You sit still when you're calculating, Nell said. This is different. This is, she waved a hand vaguely. You're not running. Yoruichi looked at the desert. I'm not running from anything. That's what I mean. Nell sounded gently impressed. Usually when you come somewhere, you're in motion the whole time. Even when you're sitting still, everything about you is saying I'll be gone in a moment. Right now you're, another wave. Present. Yoruichi was quiet. He's 17, she said. He's going to be a great deal older than 17 very quickly, Nell said, with the authority of someone who had watched time do unusual things to unusual people. The Hollow King's aging pattern isn't the same as human standard. He's already, she paused. You can feel it. The depth of him. He's 17 in years and something much older in the way he carries things. He had a hard life, Yoruichi said. It came out with more softness than she'd intended. So did we, Nell said simply. That's not what I mean. I mean, she was quiet for a moment, finding words. He's not carrying his pain like a wound. He's already carrying it like weight he's decided to use. A beat. That takes most people decades. He did it in 9 days. Yoruichi said nothing. The desert wind moved through the silence. I'm not telling you what to feel, Nell said. I'm just saying that when someone extraordinary shows up in the desert, pretending you haven't noticed doesn't make you detached. It just makes you slow. She stood, brushing sand off her dress with brisk efficiency. You've been running from things that matter since before I became Trace Espada. Nell, I'm going to bed, Nell announced. Think about whatever you want. She looked back with dark eyes that were, in this light, very old and very kind. But maybe also think about what you're actually afraid of. She left. Yoruichi sat on the rampart with the desert below her and thought about that question with the same thoroughness she brought to strategic problems, and came to the same answer she always came to when she was being honest with herself rather than performing honesty. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of stopping. Of caring about a place enough to stay in it. Of letting someone get close enough that leaving would cost something real. She'd been in motion since before the exile. She'd chosen speed so long ago that standing still had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a threat. She sat with that for a long time. Then she stood up, looked at the desert once more, and went back inside. She found Izuku in the library section of Las Noches, not a library exactly, more an archive, vast and Arrancar organized, but he'd found the texts Nell had mentioned and was sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 of them open around him, reading with the focused energy of someone who had grown up documenting everything in notebooks. He looked up when she came in. Can't sleep, she asked. Reading about the Quincy remnant hierarchy, he said. If they're coming, they'll come after the Commission's retrieval team, she said. They'll want to see what the Commission's team does first. Intel before action. She sat across from him on the floor, uninvited, and he made a fractional adjustment to share the spread of texts without being asked. She noted this. Kisuk has files. Kisuk being, Urahara Kisuk. He's the one who identified your signature and sent me here. She pulled one of the texts toward her. Old Arrancar script, partially in a language that was older than Arrancar, partially in what looked like annotated human language. He'll be an asset. He's also occasionally an obstacle. The way to tell the difference is whether he wants something from you that benefits him or something from you that benefits everyone. He usually wants both, layered. Sounds complicated. He's the most intelligent person I know, she said. That comes with layers. She looked at the text. Have you contacted him? Not yet. Izuku was watching her with the thoughtful attention she was starting to recognize as his default mode, not invasive, not calculating, just genuinely present. Was sending you here the first move? She considered that. Probably, she said. Kisuk doesn't send people. He sends pieces. She put the text down. Which means he's decided you're worth pieces. What does that mean for me? It means when the retrieval team comes, you might have more options than you think. She met his eyes. But it also means Kisuke is watching how you handle it. He respects power. He respects intelligence more. And what he respects most is someone who can tell the difference between allies and assets. Which am I to him? Unknown yet, she said honestly. Which is why he sent me first. A slight pause. I'm easier to trust. He almost smiled at that. You burst into a training session from behind without warning. And yet you trust me more than you'd trust a man in a hat who you've never met. She looked at him steadily. Tells you something about the hat. He did smile then, quick, genuine, one of those expressions that arrived before his control got to it. What do you trust? He asked. In people. What's the thing that makes you decide? She thought about that seriously. Whether they make room, she said. Whether they leave space for other people to be exactly what they are without trying to fit them into a shape that's useful. She paused. Most people in my experience want to make everyone around them useful. Or safe. Or, contained, he said. She looked at him. Sorry, he said. That word, it keeps coming up. No, you're right. She held his gaze. You're right. Most people want to contain what they can't control. A pause. You don't do that. I have a different problem, he said. I'm terrible at asking people to stay. She blinked. I'm always, he looked at the texts in front of him. I'm always the one trying to make it okay for people to leave. So they don't feel obligated. So the choice is free. He turned a page without reading it. Bakugo told me once that my problem was I treated every relationship like I was the burden. Like the other person was doing me a favor by being there. Was he right? A long pause. Maybe. He looked up. I'm working on that one too. She looked at him, at the 17-year-old who was carrying the weight of a betrayal and a new world and an unprecedented power and finding time between all of it to be honest about his own patterns, and felt something settle in her. Not the falling sensation people described. Something more solid. More deliberate. Like choosing ground to stand on. For what it's worth, she said, I'm not here because of obligation. She held his gaze. I came because something interesting asked me a question from across a dimensional boundary and I've never been able to leave an interesting question alone. And now that you're here. Now that I'm here, she said, I'm finding the question is more interesting than I expected. He looked at her for a moment with those green luminous eyes and didn't say anything clever or deflect or turn it into a joke, and she found that the absence of those responses was doing something she hadn't anticipated. 3 days, he said. The retrieval team. 3 days, she agreed. We should sleep. Probably. Neither of them moved for another hour, reading through old texts in comfortable silence with the desert pressing against the walls of Las Noches and the king's domain warm and steady around them like a room that had decided it was glad to be occupied again. The second day she was there, Bakugo cornered her. Not aggressively. Bakugo had more tactical intelligence than his reputation suggested, and he was clearly operating in a register Yoruichi read as serious mode, the aggression turned down and something more focused turned up. He found her in the outer corridor, and he fell into step beside her without preamble. You're Yoruichi Shihoin, he said. Former captain of the 2nd Division. Fastest Shuinpa on record. Flattery noted. What do you want? I want to know if he can handle what's coming. His jaw was tight. Not the retrieval team. The after. If he goes back, when he goes back, they'll classify him. They'll try to fit him into a framework that makes him manageable. He said the last word with a contempt that was clearly personal. I need to know if he's built for that or if it's going to destroy him. She looked at Bakugo Katsuki sideways. Read the Ryatsu quality he wasn't suppressing, bright, sharp, laced through with something guilty and fierce. You care about him. Don't make it weird, he said immediately. You came to an alien desert to warn him, she said. I think the weird ship has sailed. His jaw worked. We grew up together, he said, like that was an explanation, like it covered all the history in those 4 words. I know what he looks like when he's about to go so far past his limits that he doesn't come back. He looked straight ahead. I've been watching for that look for 4 years. And he doesn't have it, Bakugo said. For the first time in 4 years he doesn't have that look. Something moved in his expression, complicated and honest. He looks like he fits inside his own skin. A pause. I need to know that's real. That this place, whatever's happened here, that it's making him stronger instead of giving him somewhere to hide, Yoruichi said. Yeah. She walked 3 steps without answering. Gave it the consideration it deserved. He's not hiding, she said. He came here running from something, and he landed in the middle of something else, and instead of using the second thing to avoid the first thing, he's been using it to prepare to go back and face the first thing. She looked at Bakugo. He talks about your hero society. About what he wants to change. A pause. He's not building a retreat. He's building a foundation. Bakugo was quiet. He left a pin on his desk, he said, and the way he said it made her understand that he'd checked. That he'd gone to Izuku's room after and seen the empty space where the pin wasn't. He knows what he left behind, she said. He hasn't forgotten it. He's deciding whether to pick it up again or put something better in its place. Bakugo stopped walking. She stopped too. Tell him, Bakugo said, very quietly. Tell him, when we're gone, tell him, that I'll fix it. He wasn't looking at her. The commission assessment. The classification. I'll fix it. I don't know how yet, but, his hands were flat against his sides. Not sparking. The most deliberate control she'd seen from him. I owe him that. Tell him yourself, she said. I tried to. A pause. He keeps making it, he keeps being so, he stopped. Started again. He makes it easy to not apologize. He doesn't need it, so you think you don't need to say it. But the not saying it, stays in your chest, she said. Yeah. Then go say it, she said. Today. Before you leave. She looked at him with the directness she reserved for things that mattered. Trust me. With this kind of thing, the window is longer than you think and shorter than you're counting on. Bakugo nodded once. Tightly. Then walked, quickly, in the direction of wherever Izuku was. She watched him go and thought about windows. She sparred with Halibel that afternoon. Not to test each other, they both knew what the other was capable of, in the broad architectural sense. More as a conversation in the language they were both fluent in. Sword and speed and Ryatsu and the specific grammar of 2 people who had spent decades learning to move. They were 40 minutes in, breathing hard, standing still in the center of the courtyard with their weapons at rest, when Halibel said, "You're staying." "I haven't decided." "You have," Halibel said. "Your center of gravity shifted." She said it the way she said most things, like a neutral observation, like weather. Yesterday you were positioned toward the Garganta array. Today you're positioned toward the interior of Las Noches. Yoruichi thought about denying this. Decided against it. It's interesting here. It is, Halibel agreed. He is, Halibel said. They were quiet for a moment in the way of 2 people who have arrived at the same place by different roads and can acknowledge the convergence without making a ceremony of it. The fraction you lost, Yoruichi said quietly. Halibel's expression didn't change. But her Ryatsu shifted fractionally, the deep current turning. Mila rose. Sun Apache. The names were precise. Careful. They chose me. I didn't ask them to die. I know. He makes me think about what choosing means again, Halibel said. Whether it's possible to start building something without fearing what the building will cost. She looked at Tiburon's hilt, not the blade. He carried the first night here like he'd been waiting to be tested and was relieved to finally know what the test looked like. And what did the test look like? Whether he'd break, Halibel said. He didn't. No, Yoruichi agreed. He didn't. They sheathed their weapons at the same time. The retrieval team arrives tomorrow, Halibel said. Then tonight we should all sleep, Yoruichi said. Which means you should tell him that, since he'll be in the archive reading until dawn otherwise. Something moved in Halibel's expression that was the most purely warm thing Yoruichi had seen from her. Go tell him yourself, Halibel said. You're faster. Yoruichi laughed, the real one again, arriving uninvited, and went. The desert outside Las Noches was very still. Somewhere in its depths, a hollow called out, long and low. The king's domain settled around Las Noches like a hand cupped around a flame, not to contain it, but to make sure the wind didn't reach it before it was ready to burn. Tomorrow the commission was coming. Tonight there were 3 women and a boy in a ruined castle in the White Desert, and the space between them had the quality of something being built. Not quickly. Not carelessly. But built. Chapter 4, What Kings Are Made of. The retrieval team came at dawn. Or what passed for dawn in Hueco Mundo, a marginal brightening of the artificial sky, a shift in the desert's ambient light from deep white to something slightly warmer, like the universe half-heartedly attempting morning. Izuku was already awake. He'd been awake for 2 hours, sitting in the courtyard with his back against the inner wall, feeling the edges of his domain and getting familiar with what normal felt like so he'd know when something changed. Something changed at 5:47. 8 signatures. Human spiritual energy, but disciplined, compressed the way commission-trained operatives compressed theirs, tight and professional, not trying to hide but not advertising either. They came through a garganta approximately 1 kilometer east, landed clean, and spread into a formation he recognized from hero tactical training. Search and contain. Perimeter first, then close. He stood up. Nell was beside him before he'd taken a step, her Ryatsu signature carrying that familiar double quality, surface and depth, child form and the vast thing underneath it. She hadn't slept either, or had slept in the 2 hours between his watch and hers. Her expression was serious in the complete way, the ancient quality fully forward. 8, she said. I count the same. The 2 on the south flank have different Ryatsu texture, she said. Not commission standard. Something else layered under the training. She paused. Quirk suppressant technology reads as a separate spiritual signature. They're carrying it externally, not integrated. Which means, it can be separated from them without hurting them, he said. She looked at him sideways. That's what you're already thinking about. How to do this without hurting them. They're doing their job, he said. They're not my enemies. Some of them might disagree with that distinction. Let them, he said. Halibel came from the inner corridors with Yoruichi behind her, both moving at the calm velocity of people who had already assessed and were now executing. Yoruichi was in her battle gear, the black bodysuit, sleeves off, the easy confidence of someone who had been in more fights than she could count and had stopped being impressed by the approach of any particular one. Halibel had Tiburon at her hip and her sea-glass eyes already reading the spatial layout. The building, Halibel said. They'll try to draw you outside the walls. They won't need to, Izuku said. I'm going out. 4 heads turned to him. If I wait inside, this becomes a siege, he said. Sieges get ugly and long and people get hurt in ugly and long things. He looked at each of them. I'm going out. I'm going to talk to them first. Yoruichi's expression cycled through 3 things in quick succession. They have suppressant tech, calibrated to 1 for all signature, he said. Halibel told me 2 days ago that I needed to understand myself before anyone else defined me. He met her gaze. This is what that looks like in practice. A beat of silence. What do you want us to do? Halibel asked. Stay visible but not threatening, he said. I want them to see that I have allies who are choosing to be here. Not soldiers. Not weapons. He paused. If it goes bad, we'll know, Yoruichi said flatly. We'll know before you do. He nodded. Then he went to find Bakugo and Todoroki. He found them already up, already dressed, already positioned near the east corridor with the particular alertness of two people who had felt the arrivals and were waiting for someone to tell them what posture to take. Bakugo looked at him with that direct red gaze that had always been, underneath everything, one of the most honest things in Izuku's life. They're here, Bakugo said. Yeah. You're going out. Yeah. Bakugo's jaw worked. He looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, which for him was the equivalent of a long pause, and then he looked up and said, I told the commission you were a risk. I told them the assessment was accurate. His voice was level. I was wrong about what that meant. The risk calculus I ran was incomplete because I was scared and I let scared do math. He met Izuku's eyes. I'm saying that because I need to say it, not because I need you to do anything with it. Izuku looked at him. There was a version of this conversation where he said it's fine, I understand, it doesn't matter. He recognized that version because he'd been having it his entire life, smoothing things over, making it easy, carrying the weight of other people's mistakes so they didn't have to. He'd always told himself it was generosity. Halibel had a different word for it. It hurt, Izuku said. The letter hurt. The way nobody came to me first, that hurt. He held Bakugo's gaze. I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because you asked me to be honest and he paused. I'm working on doing that more. Bakugo absorbed this with the still, receiving quality that very few people knew he was capable of. Okay, he said. Okay, Izuku said. They stood in the corridor for a moment with 16 years of history between them, the complicated weight of it settling into something that wasn't lighter exactly but was more honestly distributed. Then Todoroki said, we should be on the outer wall when they see you. So they see we came here voluntarily. Izuku looked at him. You don't have to, I know, Todoroki said simply. That's the point. He walked out of Lost No Chase through the main gate. The gate was enormous, Arrancar scale, everything in this place was Arrancar scale, and it opened at his approach the way it had been opening all week, with the smooth inevitability of a space that had decided to respond to him. He walked through it and out onto the white sand and stopped at approximately 100 meters from the nearest operative. The retrieval team had reformed when he came into view. Professional, fluid, they'd been trained well. 6 of them spread into a containment arc, 2 hanging back with equipment he recognized as the suppressant technology, rectangular devices the size of briefcases that were already emitting a low-frequency hum he could feel, and the one for all layer of his power. Calibrated, as he'd told Yoruichi, to the wrong frequency. The team leader stepped forward. She was older than he'd expected, 40s, the face of someone who had been doing difficult things for a long time without apology. Her Ryatsu was clean and strong and carried the signature of a high-clearance commission operative, the kind that had actual combat capability rather than just administrative authority. He read her posture as controlled caution rather than aggression. Good. That was something to work with. Midoriya Izuku, she said. Her voice was steady. I'm lead operative Shida Riko. I'm authorized to, I know what you're authorized to do, he said. Not rudely. Just clearly. And I know why you're here. And I want to have this conversation like 2 people who are both trying to get an outcome that doesn't end badly, if that's possible. Shida looked at him. He could see her processing, the difference between the file she'd been given and the 17-year-old standing in front of her. He was wearing the same clothes he'd arrived in, his right arm in its king's armor formation, one for all, a warm lightning presence in his blood. He was aware, what the Commission's file had prepared her for. The Commission's concern is public safety, she said, pivoting smoothly rather than abandoning her position. I know, he said. And I take that seriously. More seriously than they think, which is part of the problem. He kept his voice even, his posture open. The suppressant technology you brought is calibrated to one for all spectral signature. I want you to know that so you understand when I tell you, it's not going to do what the Commission thinks it's going to do. Shida's eyes moved to his arm. To the king's armor. Back to his face. The file says quirk evolution, she said carefully. That's a polite way of saying they don't know what it is, Izuku said. I'm going to tell you what it actually is, and I want you to hear it completely before you make any decisions about what to do with the information. Can you do that? A beat. Shida glanced back at her team. Some communication passed. Then she looked at him again. Talk. He talked. He kept it factual and direct, the way Halibel had taught him, no drama, no padding, no appeal to emotion before evidence. He told her about the rift, the integration, the Hollow King designation and what it structurally meant in terms of the spiritual hierarchy. He told her the suppressant tech was calibrated for 1/3 of his current power at most, and that this was not a threat but an operational reality she needed to be working with. He told her that he had no intention of returning to Japan to be contained. He also told her that he had every intention of returning to Japan eventually, on his own terms, and that when he did he wanted to be able to do so without this conversation happening again at higher stakes. Shida listened to all of it with the focused attention of someone filing every syllable. He could feel her team's Ryatsu shifting behind her, not aggressive, but recalibrating. Some of them had genuine spiritual perception, the kind that was responding to the information in his words by checking it against what their senses were telling them. When he finished, Shida was quiet for a moment. The Commission, she said, choosing each word, is not going to accept a report that says the target voluntarily explained his power evolution and asked us to go away. I know, he said. So I'm not asking you to tell them that. He reached into his jacket. Pulled out a folded document, something he'd written in the archive 2 nights ago, working from the old texts Nell had found. 3 pages in clean Japanese, explaining the Hollow King designation, its historical precedents, and the structural reason why Commission standard containment protocols would be not just ineffective but actively counterproductive. I'm asking you to give them this. Shida looked at the document. It's information, he said. It doesn't ask them to do anything. It just gives them accurate data. He held her gaze. The Commission builds policy on data. Give them better data. She took the document. Behind him, he felt the Ryatsu of Las Noches, felt Halibel's ocean current steady on the wall above the gate, felt Yoruichi's quicksilver presence at high elevation to the right, felt Nell's double signature from the parapet. Not deployed. Not threatening. Just visible, and present, and choosing to be both. Shida looked up at the walls. She looked at Halibel and Yoruichi and Nell. She looked at the gate, and he knew she could feel, at whatever level her perception operated, the quality of the king's domain. The ground beneath your feet presence. Then she looked at the parapet above the gate. Bakugo and Todoroki. Shida went very still for a moment. Student Bakugo, she said. Student Todoroki. Her voice was completely neutral. You came voluntarily. We have a week of personal leave, Todoroki said, from the parapet. Hueco Mundo's geographic location was not specified as off-limits in any current Commission directive. Shida's mouth did something that might have been the ghost of a smile, controlled before it arrived. She looked back at Izuku. You understand we'll be back. I expect it, he said. I'm not asking for permanent non-interference. I'm asking for time to complete a process that started without my permission and needs my full attention to be finished safely. He held her gaze. 2 weeks. Then I'll open communication channels through an intermediary. He paused. Tell the commission that the Hollow King's domain is not a weapon. Tell them what I told you it is. Tell them that every person standing in it right now came here voluntarily and is standing in it without coercion. Shida looked around. At the team behind her, all of whom had stopped moving in the particular way that the domain affected people, not frozen, not paralyzed, just settled. Stable. The operational anxiety that commission operatives carried as professional background noise had gone quiet in all of them. She noticed. He could see her noticing. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks. She looked at the document in her hand. Your handwriting is very neat for someone who's been in a desert for 9 days. I practice, he said. The ghost of a smile made it further this time. She folded the document. Tucked it away. Stand down, she said to her team, without looking back. The suppressant technology went off. The hum stopped. Shida looked at Izuku for one final moment with the eyes of someone who had just recalculated several fundamental assumptions. Midoriya, she said. For what it's worth, the Commission's concern wasn't about you specifically. It was about one for all. About the liability of that much power in a developmental stage. I know, he said. The man who gave it to you should have, yeah, he said quietly. He should have. Shida opened a Garganta, commission-grade equipment, smooth and professional, and her team moved through it in formation, and she went last, and at the threshold she paused. The document will be on the director's desk by noon, she said. Then she was gone. The Garganta closed. The desert was quiet. Izuku stood in the white sand and let out a breath that took a long time to finish. Behind him, Yoruichi dropped from the wall and landed beside him with the absolute silence of a full-speed descent perfectly controlled. She didn't say anything for a moment. Just stood beside him. That was well done, she said. And she said it the way Halibel said better, simply, without performance, which made it mean exactly what it was. They'll come back with more, he said. Yes, she agreed. But next time you'll have 2 more weeks of being exactly what you are. She looked at him sideways. And they'll have 2 weeks of their director reading that document. He looked at the spot where the Garganta had been. I left All Might's pin on my desk, he said. When I packed. She waited. I'm starting to think that wasn't an accident, he said. I think I knew, on some level, that whatever I was building toward, it didn't need that particular weight anymore. He looked at his arm, at the king's armor. That doesn't mean I'm abandoning what he gave me. One for all is still, he paused. It's still in my blood. The predecessors are still there. I didn't lose that. You lost the image of it, Yoruichi said. Yeah. That's different from losing the thing. Yeah, he said again. And then, quietly, I think that's what growing up is, actually. She looked at him for a moment with those gold eyes that held 1600 years of their own complicated history with images and things and the gap between them. Come on, she said. Before Nell claims the best breakfast portion. He laughed and followed her back inside. Bakugo found him an hour later. Izuku was in the archive again, not reading this time, just sitting with the texts around him, processing the morning. Bakugo walked in, looked at the texts, looked at him, and sat down across from him with the direct no-preamble energy that was his native mode. They're gone, Bakugo said. I felt them leave. You negotiated, Bakugo said. He said it like he was still processing what that looked like in practice. You went out there and just talked at them. That's a generous description of what happened. You handed their lead operative a document and sent them home. Bakugo's voice had a quality in it Izuku couldn't immediately categorize. I wrote the assessment that sent them here and you talked them into taking a research paper back to their boss. The document was important, Izuku said. They needed accurate information. Deku. Bakugo said his name in the voice that only appeared when he'd stopped performing and the actual thing underneath was speaking. You know what I thought was going to happen today? What? I thought you were going to have to fight, he said. I thought, he stopped. Jaw working. I've been watching you fight for 4 years. I know what it costs you. Every time you push past the limit, every bone, he gestured at the king's armor. I thought today was going to be that. I thought you were going to have to destroy something to prove you were free of it. Izuku was quiet. But you just, Bakugo looked at his hands. You just showed them what you were and they left. The domain, Izuku said. And the document. And the fact that Shida is a professional who was genuinely trying to do her job well. He paused. Most people, when you give them accurate information and treat them like they're capable of using it well, will try to use it well. Bakugo looked at him. That's always been your thing, he said, and there was something in his voice that had never been there before, a quality Izuku had to sit with for a moment before he recognized it. You always believe people are going to surprise you in the right direction. He paused. Even when they've given you plenty of evidence to the contrary. Even then, Izuku confirmed. It's infuriating, Bakugo said. It's also, he stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. Some things, in Bakugo's language, were communicated by the decision to stop speaking rather than by the words. Izuku understood. Go home, Izuku said. Fix what you said you'd fix. I don't know how yet. You'll figure it out, Izuku said. You're the most determined person I know when you've decided something matters. He met Bakugo's eyes. And you've decided this matters. Bakugo stood. Straightened. Took a breath. Don't get killed in the desert, he said. Don't tell the commission where I am. Wasn't planning to. He turned toward the door. At the threshold, without looking back, when you come home, and you are coming home, I'm not filing that as optional, I want to see what you've built here. He paused. I think it's going to be something worth seeing. He left. Todoroki, passing in the corridor outside, glanced in at Izuku with his silver and gray gaze and said, he means that. I know he does, Izuku said. Todoroki nodded once and moved on. An hour after Bakugo and Todoroki's Garganta closed, something else arrived. He felt it differently from the retrieval team, not the compressed professional discipline of commission operatives but something colder and more precise, like a surgical instrument. Directional. Coming from above, which the retrieval team hadn't. Moving in a pattern that was designed to triangulate and confirm rather than approach directly. He was on the outer wall with Yoruichi when it became definitive. You feel that? She asked. Since about 3 minutes ago, he said. Different signature from this morning. Quincy, she said. The word was flat and immediate. Remnant frequency. They've been using the post-war reorganization as cover for a smaller operational unit, Kisuk's been tracking them for 18 months. She was still, her gaze moving across the sky. 4 signatures. Upper elevation. They're not descending. Watching, he said. Watching the commission team's departure, she agreed. They wanted to see what happened. He thought about this. They sent the commission team as a trial run, he said. Yoruichi looked at him. They wanted to see what I'd do when confronted with a force I outmatched, he said. Whether I'd fight or negotiate. Whether I had strategic restraint or just power. He turned to look at the sky. If I'd fought this morning, they'd have a combat profile, Yoruichi said. They'd know exactly how to approach a direct engagement. She paused. By negotiating, you gave them nothing useful. Except that I'll negotiate rather than fight when given the choice. Which they'll try to use, she said. They'll present themselves as a negotiating partner to get close enough, yes, he said. So we don't let them. Nell appeared on the parapet, looking upward with those ancient eyes tracking things normal perception didn't reach. For Quincy, she confirmed. The Ryatsu pattern is specific. They're not rank and file. She was quiet for a moment. The closest comparison in my experience is Sternritter. Elite. Individually capable. What do they want? Izuku asked. What every remnant faction wants, Yoruichi said. Legitimacy. They believe the Soul King's design was corrupted and the Quincy were meant to replace Soul Society's hierarchy. Anything that exists outside that hierarchy is a theological problem. They'll call me a blasphemy, Izuku said. They'll call you worse than that, Nell said. But they won't come today. They got what they came for. The 4 signatures withdrew, clean, professional, no dramatic exit. Just gone. 2 fronts, Halibel said from behind them. She had arrived at some point in the last few minutes and had, characteristically, waited until there was something worth saying to say it. The Commission, which is a political problem. The Quincy Remnant, which is a doctrinal one. And a third, Yoruichi said. Everyone looked at her. Kisuke's been monitoring communications from Soul Society for the last week, she said. There's a faction, a specific captain who's been tracking unusual Ryatsu events since before the retrieval team was assembled. Her voice was careful. He's not aligned with the Commission. He's not Quincy. She paused. His name is Fushimi. 3rd seat, recently elevated to provisional captain status during the post-war restructuring. He's ambitious, intelligent, and he's been building a private theory about Hollow King Ryatsu for approximately 2 years. He knew before I did, Izuku said. He's been watching for it, she said. He has old texts. The same ones you found in this archive, or similar versions. She looked at him steadily. He's not going to try to contain you or destroy you. He's going to try to offer you something. What could he offer? Legitimacy, she said. Official standing within Soul Society's framework. Power structure access. Everything a 17-year-old without institutional backing might want. She held his gaze. He'll make it sound like partnership. And it's leverage, he said. Everything he offers will come with a cost that's not stated in the offer. She paused. He's the most dangerous of the 3 because he's not wrong. He can offer those things. The question is what you do when the offered cage is comfortable. The parapet was quiet. He looked at each of them. At Halibel, whose sea-glass eyes held the specific knowledge of someone who had been offered exactly this, Aizen's promise of power and structure and protection, which had been real right up until the moment it became a leash. At Nell, who had been reduced to a child form by someone who had decided that her full power was inconvenient. At Yoruichi, who had spent centuries in exile rather than return to a house that wanted to own what she was. 3 women who had already been through every version of this conversation. I'm not going to take his offer, he said. I know, Yoruichi said. But he'll come anyway. And when he does, you'll need to be able to refuse something genuinely appealing, which is harder than refusing something obviously bad. How do I prepare for that? She looked at him. By knowing clearly what you already have, she said. What you're building here. So that when someone offers you a version of it with a structure built over the top, you can see the difference. He stood with that. Let it settle. What am I building here? He asked. Not rhetorically. Genuinely asking. Halibel spoke first. A domain, she said. In the literal and the larger sense. People who chose to be here, Yoruichi said. Something that doesn't fit the pyramid, Nell said, because it isn't shaped like a pyramid. She tilted her head. It's shaped like ground. He looked at the 3 of them. At the white desert beyond the walls. At Las Noches, which had been a monument to Aizen's ambition and was becoming something he hadn't had a word for yet. That's enough, he said. For now, that's enough. That evening, he trained alone for the first time. Not fighting, not sparring, the other thing, the thing Halibel had showed him at the beginning. Sitting in the center of the courtyard with the 3 layers of his power in his awareness, not managing them but listening. One for all first. The warm lightning. The predecessor's memories, not precise narratives but impressions, strength, determination, the willingness to be broken for a principle. 7 people's accumulated choice to pass something forward rather than hold it. He held that warmth and thought about what it meant to be the 8th bearer, the one it had been building toward. The one who had taken it somewhere it hadn't been before. The hollow inheritance. Cold tidal patience. The vast depth of it, the exponential potential Halibel had described, contained by the predecessor structure. He had started to understand it differently in the last few days, not as a second system running parallel to one for all but as a different dimension of the same capacity. One for all moved through time, accumulating. The hollow inheritance moved through space, expanding. Together they were, both. Temporal and spatial. The first was his history. The second was his range. And the third thing. The king's power proper. The child of the other 2, as Nell had said. He had avoided looking at it directly because looking at it directly had, in the first days, felt like standing at the edge of something too large. Tonight he looked. It was, quiet. Not small. He knew it wasn't small. But it had a quality that was profoundly unlike what he'd expected from something with a title like Hollow King. It wasn't commanding. It wasn't authoritative. It was precisely what the old texts had described and what Nell and Halibel and Yoruichi had been articulating in different words all week. It was foundational. It existed to be stood on. To give other things a stable place to stand. The domain wasn't a weapon because weapons were designed to reduce, to cut, to suppress, to eliminate. The domain increased. Everything within it got to be more fully itself. He had spent 17 years trying to be what everyone else needed him to be. The power he developed, apparently, was to make everyone around him free to be what they were. He sat with that for a long time. Then he extended the domain. Deliberately. Consciously. He breathed out and let the king's power expand from its resting state, felt it move through the courtyard walls, through Las Noches corridors, out into the desert beyond. He could feel everything within it, the stone, the sand, the 3 women in their separate evening routines, the small presences of the few remaining inhabitants of this ruined place. He felt them all with the domain's non-intrusive awareness, not reading them deeply but simply knowing they were there. He kept expanding. 1 kilometer. 2. The suppression tech from this morning had registered as a disturbance from a kilometer out. He could feel how his domain interacted with it now, how the king's power would have made it irrelevant rather than overcome it, the Garganta technology's frequency dissolving at the edges. Understanding through immersion. 3 kilometers. He could feel the edge of the hollow-populated regions, the massive congregations of Minos far out in the desert. They felt his domain reach them and, stopped. Not fleeing. Not approaching. Just stopping. The mindless hunger of Minos-level hollows had no framework for what they were feeling, but their bodies understood it instinctively. Ground. Foundation. Something that said here is a fixed point, orient to it. He pulled it back. Slowly. Deliberately. When he opened his eyes, all 3 of them were in the courtyard. Halibel, standing near the entrance. Yoruichi, sitting on the wall above with her legs over the edge. Nell, cross-legged on the sand 6 feet away, watching him with both signatures of her Ryatsu running closer to the same frequency than he'd ever felt them. 5 kilometers, Halibel said quietly. You reached 5 kilometers. He looked at his hands. The king's armor had extended past the elbow during the expansion, retreating now to its baseline. It didn't feel like effort, he said. It felt like, exhaling. Because it's not projection, Nell said. It's not pushing power outward. It's allowing what's already there to become what it is. She was looking at him with those ancient eyes. You understand that now? I think so. Yoruichi dropped from the wall and landed in the sand without sound. She walked toward him at an even pace and stopped a foot away and looked at him with the particular quality she had when she was deciding to say something she hadn't planned to say. When I was captain of the 2nd Division, she said, I ran from a title that wanted to contain me. I ran from a clan that wanted to own what I was. Her voice was level. I've been running for so long that I got very good at knowing what I was running from and had almost no practice knowing what I was running toward. A pause. But I know what toward feels like. I felt it when I first walked into this domain. She looked at him steadily. I'm not leaving. He held her gaze. Yoruichi, I'm not making a declaration, she said. I'm making a statement of fact. A slight pause. I'm also telling you it's okay to not make everyone's choices comfortable for them. Sometimes the most honest thing is to just be where you are. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said. And meant it in all its dimensions. Nell, behind him, said very softly, I've been thinking about what I told you. About the shelter I built. She was standing now. Both her Ryatsu signatures were almost perfectly aligned. I think this might be a place where I don't need the shelter anymore. Halibel turned to look at her. I don't know, Nell said. I'm not, she paused. I'm saying I'm thinking about it. I'm saying the thinking is happening. That's enough, Halibel said, and the warmth in her voice was the fullest Izuku had heard it. The thinking is enough for now. The courtyard held all 4 of them in a silence that was not empty but full of the day that had passed and the 3 fronts that were coming and the document sitting on a commission director's desk and the 5-kilometer exhale of the king's domain still faintly present in the sand. Full of choice, which was the specific quality that distinguished it from the silence that had been here before. Tomorrow, Izuku said. Tomorrow, they agreed. He looked at the 3 of them, Halibel's ocean calm, Yoruichi's contained lightning, Nell's ancient brightness, and felt the king's power settle in his chest like a breath finding a rhythm it intended to keep. Not a bomb anymore. A foundation. The desert held still all around them and for the first time in a very long time, Las Noches felt less like a ruin and more like a beginning. Chapter 5, Blood and Covenant. They came on a Tuesday. No announcement. No warning, pressure building at the edge of his domain that gave him the comfortable runway of the commission team's approach. The Quincy remnant's arrival was a surgical cut, 4 signatures dropping through a garganta that opened and closed in under 3 seconds, directly above Las Noches, at a height that put them inside his domain before he'd registered the entry point. He felt them land on the roof. He was in the middle of breakfast. He set down his chopsticks and looked at Yoruichi. Inside the domain already, she said. She was already standing. They timed it, he said. They knew the entry window. They've been watching for 2 weeks, Halibel said from across the table, Tiburon already at her hip though he hadn't seen her move for it. They mapped the domain's detection threshold. Nell was on her feet with her hands loose at her sides, and her Ryatsu was doing the thing it had been doing more frequently over the past week, the 2 signatures running parallel, the deeper one pressing closer to the surface, like water testing ice from underneath. 4 points on the roof. He felt them spreading into a formation, not containment this time, the commission's perimeter approach. This was something more precise. Each of the 4 had moved to a corner of the building. 90-degree symmetry. He knew what that meant from Nell's Quincy architecture lessons 2 days ago. A ceiling formation. They're going to try to bind the domain, he said. Yes, Yoruichi said. She was already at the corridor entrance. How long do we have? He felt the formation settling, the spiritual pressure of 4 Quincy each drawing Racier into position, the geometric pattern beginning to take shape in the air above Las Noches. 2 minutes before it locks. Maybe 3. Then we have 1 minute to decide how we handle this, Yoruichi said. Because if the seal completes, it won't, he said. He was already moving. He came up through the interior of Las Noches and hit the roof at a speed that would have been impossible 3 weeks ago. One for all's full output, hollow power extending his range, the king's domain expanding outward as he moved, not pushed, exhaled, the way he'd practiced, and when he came through the roof access and felt the open desert sky above him, he understood immediately what he was looking at. 4 figures. Each at a corner of the massive structure. Each dressed in white. Each with a weapon drawn, not swords, but the precise spiritual constructs of Quincy combat, arrows drawn in the shapes of Hylic file, glowing with the specific frequency of Sanct Altar adjacent racial manipulation. The nearest figure turned at his emergence. She was young, his age, possibly older. It was hard to tell with Quincy operatives whose training tended to make them carry themselves older than their years. Her hair was silver white and her eyes were the specific pale gray of high-altitude sky. Her Ryatsu had a cutting quality, like a scalpel. "Midoriya Izuku," she said. Her voice was accented, not Japanese, something Eastern European layered under her Japanese, the kind of accent that happens when someone learned a language in later years. "You are identified as a theological inconsistency and a structural threat to the reclamation framework." "Good morning to you too," he said. She blinked. Briefly. The Quincy operatives at the other 3 corners didn't move, they were maintaining the ceiling formation, their concentration absolute. She was the voice and the combat arm. Interesting division of labor. "The Hollow King designation is not a title you can hold legitimately," she said, recovering her rhythm. "The spiritual hierarchy was designed by the Soul King with specific, I know the argument," he said. He kept his voice even. "I've read the old texts. All of them, including the ones that predate the current Soul Society organization." He met her pale gray eyes. "The hierarchy was designed to manage the flow of souls between worlds. The Hollow King designation exists in those texts not as a threat but as a corrective mechanism. A stabilizing force that appears when the flow has been disrupted enough times that the system needs a new anchor point." Her expression shifted fractionally. "You've done your reading," she said. "For about 2 weeks straight," he confirmed. "Now can we have this conversation somewhere that isn't the middle of a ceiling array? Because the people you have at the other corners have been drawing ratio for 90 seconds and that's getting uncomfortable." Something moved in her face, the working of someone recalculating faster than expected. "If we stand down the formation, I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I live here." A pause. Then, quietly into a communication link he could hear as a specific Ryatsu frequency, a word he didn't recognize in a language he was starting to piece together from context. The 3 figures at the corners released their formations. The ceiling geometry dissolved. The pressure dissipated. She looked at him with her scalpel Ryatsu still drawn but not directed. "Lena Voss," she said. "Sternritter designate. Current ranking, Quincy Remnant Operative First Class." "Izuku Midoriya," he said. "Current ranking, Works in Progress." Her mouth did something that absolutely wasn't a smile and then corrected itself. "The theological position of the Remnant faction tells you I'm a blasphemy," he said. "I heard it the first time. I'm asking you to tell me your personal position." She went very still. "Because you're the one who came down here to talk to me," he said. "The formation could have completed without you coming to this corner. You chose to face me directly." He looked at her steadily. "That's not doctrine. That's curiosity." The still quality of her face held for exactly 3 seconds. "The Remnant faction's leadership assigned me this operation," she said carefully. "Their assessment of you is as I stated." "And your assessment?" "Is still forming," she said. "Precisely." Like each word was load-bearing. "Then form it here," he said. "You have questions. Ask them." He brought Lena Voss inside Las Noches. Not alone, her 3 operatives followed, their weapons not deployed but not absent either, the particular posture of people who had been trained to always have a hand near the door. Yoruichi materialized at his shoulder at the entrance with the specific quality of someone choosing to be visible as both a welcome and a warning. Halibel emerged from the inner corridor. Nell came from above, dropping into the entrance hall with cheerful disregard for the tension. The three Quincy operatives reacted to Nell. It was subtle, a shift in posture, a fractional reorientation of attention. Nell noticed and smiled at them with the full wattage grin that worked like a conversational hand grenade. "You're very symmetrical," she told the nearest one. "Is that a Quincy thing or a personal aesthetic?" The operative stared at her. "Nell," Izuku said. "I'm being friendly," she said. "It's a skill I have. You're being strategically disarming. Those aren't different things." But she pulled back to Halibel's side, her grin modulating to something more readable as "I am paying very close attention and remembering everything." They sat in the main hall, the large central space that had once been some kind of formal gathering point in Las Noches Isanera function and now served, in Izuku's version of the place, as the room where things got decided. It had that quality. The acoustics. The dimensions. Lena Voss sat across from Izuku with her operatives flanking her, and she looked at the space around her with the assessing eye of someone cataloging tactical information and the separate eye of someone noticing that the space felt different from what she'd anticipated. "The domain," she said. "It extends inside the building. Everywhere I've been for more than a few hours," he said. "It's not aggressive," she said, and there was something in her voice that was clearly not what she'd expected to be saying. "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. The Remnant faction's doctrine holds that hollow power is inherently corruptive. That any being that integrates it becomes a vector for the corruption of soul flow. She said it with the specific flatness of someone reciting a position they've been told to hold rather than one they've arrived at organically. The Hollow King, in their interpretation, would be the apex of that corruption. "But you don't think that's what you're sitting in," he said. Her pale eyes were steady. "I think the domain feels like the opposite of corruption," she said. "I think that's a significant data point." "It is," he agreed. "The Remnant leadership won't care about the data point," she said. "They'll send a larger force. More specialized." Her voice was still level but something underneath it had shifted, the quality of someone giving information they hadn't been authorized to give. "Within a week, possibly less. The operation today was assessment. The operation next time will be elimination," Yoruichi said, from the side. Lena looked at her. "Yes. How many?" Yoruichi asked. 12 minimum. Sternritter-capable individuals. 3 of them have specialized anti-hollow techniques developed during the Yawatch campaign. Lena paused. "The doctrine classification means they'll come without the restriction of trying to capture or contain. The briefing will say, eliminate the inconsistency." The hall was quiet. Izuku watched Lena Voss carefully. She was leaning slightly forward, her hands flat on the table in a posture that was subtly different from her combat stance. Open hands. A choice. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Because the text you cited," she said. "The stabilizing force interpretation. I've read it too. I've read it since I was assigned to study the Hollow King emergence protocols 4 years ago." Something moved in her expression, controlled, but present. "I was told that interpretation was apocryphal. Rejected. That the primary text clearly indicated a destructive designation. But you kept the secondary interpretation," he said. "I kept it because it was more internally consistent with the broader framework," she said. "The primary interpretation required ignoring 800 years of corroborating documentation. A beat. I'm a Quincy. We believe in precision. The imprecise interpretation is not the correct one simply because it's convenient for the doctrine." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "My report will state that the target was not present," she said. "That the domain signatures were residual. That Las Noches showed signs of recent habitation but no current occupancy." She was very steady. The 12 they send will arrive at the wrong location. That puts you at risk, Nell said quietly, from Halibel's side. The remnant faction's doctrine is wrong, Lena said simply. Precision requires I act on that. The hall held a silence that had weight and texture. After they realized the misdirection, Izuku said carefully, they'll know it was you. Eventually, she said. Probably. She looked at her hands for a brief moment. Back up. I was assigned to this operation because my readings of the theological texts diverge from faction orthodoxy and the leadership wanted me somewhere they could watch me. A slight pause. They've been watching me for 2 years. I've been watching them back. She straightened. I'm not doing this for you, Midoriya. I'm doing it because the faction I belong to is wrong and I've been deciding for a long time when that wrongness becomes something I can no longer carry. He held her gaze. And today is that day. Today is that day, she said. He extended his hand across the table. She looked at it. Then she shook it, clean, direct, the grip of someone who had made a decision and was done second-guessing it. You should leave the faction's operational range, Yoruichi said to her. When the misdirection is discovered, they'll review your movements. I know, Lena said. She stood. I have some things I need to arrange. She looked at Izuku. I may need somewhere to be after that. The domain extends 5 kilometers, he said. You'll feel it if you're close. Walk toward it. Something crossed her face that might, in a different register, have been relief. She nodded. Moved toward the entrance. Her 3 operatives followed, and at the threshold, the largest of them, a broad-shouldered man who hadn't spoken a word the entire time, looked back and said in accented Japanese, the domain. It doesn't feel like what they told us it would feel like. No, Izuku said. I know. The man nodded and followed Lena out. Yoruichi watched the entrance for a moment. She'll be compromised within 48 hours, she said. I know, he said. You believe her? Yes. Why? He thought about it. Because she had better options if she was lying, he said. She could have let the seal complete. She could have let the 12 come here without warning us. He looked at the entrance. She gave us the exact information we needed to prepare and in exchange she gets, the possibility of somewhere to be, someday, maybe. That's not a leverage trade. That's someone doing the right thing at high personal cost. Yoruichi was quiet for a moment. You're very good at reading people. I've been very bad at it in specific cases, he said, and there was enough of something in his voice that she didn't press. 3 days passed. He trained with a new intensity, not driven by urgency, because urgency made you clumsy, but by clarity. He knew what was coming. He knew the approximate shape of it, the number, the specialized capabilities. He trained toward specific gaps rather than toward general improvement, which was a more efficient use of limited time. Yoruichi pushed him on speed. Not just movement speed, decision speed, the interval between perception and response. She had a method he'd never encountered, built around disrupting rhythm rather than testing limit. She'd come at him with a clear pattern, 2 or 3 exchanges, establish the rhythm, and then violate it without warning, different direction, different power level, different technique entirely. Forcing his domain perception and his combat response to operate on the same timeline rather than sequentially. He got tagged less. Slowly, then quickly. There, she said, after a sequence where he tracked 3 consecutive redirections without losing his center. She was breathing hard, which she hadn't been in their first sessions, and this was meaningful because she was 1600 years old and had spent a significant portion of that time doing this specifically. There. That's the pace. It feels like I'm not thinking, he said. You're not, she said. You're perceiving. They're different. Thinking is translation. Perception is direct. She stretched her shoulder. He'd caught it in the last sequence. You've been translating since you were 14. You don't need to anymore. Because of the domain. Because you finally trust what the domain tells you, she said. She looked at him with something straightforward in her expression. There's a version of this conversation that's very old. Knowing something and trusting it are, the gap is where most people live their whole lives. He looked at her. She was standing in the desert light with her hair down. She'd stopped putting it up during training sessions somewhere in the second week, he'd noticed, not commenting on it because the noticing itself was something he was still figuring out what to do with, and her gold eyes had the quality they got when she was saying something real instead of something strategic. What do you trust? He asked. She raised an eyebrow. You asked me that in the archive. You gave me half an answer. I gave you a complete answer for that moment, she said. What's the answer for this moment? She held his gaze for a pause that was longer than her usual calibration. This, she said, meaning the courtyard or the domain or something larger than both. You. What's here? A beat. I trust what I'm standing on. He held that. Yoruichi, don't make it a thing, she said. Just, let it be what it is. He nodded. She started walking back to the training position. He watched her go and let it be what it was, which was considerable and didn't need a name right now and was, in the truest sense, exactly what she described. Something worth standing on. Nell found him that night. He was on the outer wall again, it had become a habit, the evening hours on the rampart, the desert laid out beneath him. She came and sat beside him and they were quiet for a while in the easy way that had developed between them, the specific comfortable silence of two people who had established they didn't need to fill space. I'm going to do it tomorrow, she said. He looked at her. She was staring at the desert. Her hands were in her lap and both her Ryatsu signatures were running at nearly identical frequencies, a resonance that had been building all week like two tuning forks finding the same note. The full resurrection, she said. Before the Quincy come. She paused. I want to be, all of what I am, when it matters. I don't want to fight at partial strength because I built the shelter before I built the courage to leave it. You don't need my permission, he said. I know, she said. I'm telling you because, she paused. Found words. Because you're the first place in a very long time that felt like full strength was something I was allowed to have. She turned to look at him with the full forward ancient quality, the child surface and the deep thing underneath it both visible simultaneously. You know what the domain feels like from inside it? Tell me. Like being exactly what you are is the safest possible thing, she said. Not safe as in no danger. Safe as in, correct. Aligned. Her mouth curved. You built a place where being fully yourself is the foundation rather than the risk. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't build it, he said. It's just what the power does. No, she said gently. The power does what you are. The power is the shape of you. What you believe, at the level underneath words, that's what the domain expresses. She gestured at the desert around them. You believe people should be free to be what they are. So the domain makes room for it. He sat with that. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified, she said cheerfully. That's normal. That's how you know it matters. She looked at the desert again. Halibel will be there. Yoruichi will be there. A pause. Will you be there? Yes, he said immediately. She smiled, both the surface smile and the deep one, overlapping, fully aligned. Good, she said. I'll need someone to catch me if I overshoot. I'll catch you, he said. She stood up. Brushed sand off her dress. Looked down at him with that ancient young face. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's a big day. She went inside. He sat for another hour, feeling the domain breathe around him, feeling Las Noches settle into its night quiet, feeling three familiar Ryatsu signatures in their separate rooms in the building behind him. What I believe, at the level underneath words. He thought about that. About what he believed, stripped of everything that had been layered on top over 17 years of training and breaking and rebuilding. Stripped of All Might's symbol and the Commission's classification and Bakugo's assessment and even the Hollow King designation. At the level underneath words. He believed that no one should be thrown away. That was it. That was the whole thing. The first and last and bottom of it. Not in the heroic declarative sense, not as a statement of purpose or a guiding principle he'd chosen thoughtfully. Just the bedrock of him, the thing that had been there before All Might, before UA, before any of the language that had been built over the top. No one should be thrown away. Not the classmates who'd sold him out. Not the Commission operatives doing their jobs. Not a Quincy Sternritter defecting from a wrong doctrine. Not 3 women in a desert who had each been discarded in different ways by the structures that had claimed to value them. Not himself. He looked at his arm. The king's armor. The fracture pattern at his palm. He turned it over. No one should be thrown away. All right, he thought. He went inside. Nell's resurrection happened at dawn. She stood in the center of the courtyard in the flat white light and asked the 3 of them to stay back. Not far, 15 meters, the arc of the courtyard wall, but back. Room. Halibel stood with her arms at her sides and her face very still, and Izuku felt the quality of her stillness in this specific moment, the held breath quality of someone who cares deeply about an outcome they cannot control. Yoruichi stood to his left. Her shoulder was close to his. Not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, and she was still in the complete way that only happened when something mattered. Nell stood in the center. She closed her eyes. Both signatures of her Ryatsu began to move toward each other, not colliding, not merging exactly, more like water finding its level. The surface signature and the deep signature, running parallel for years, aligning. He watched it in his perception as something he had no comparative framework for, a spiritual event with no precedent in his catalog. The air in the courtyard changed. Not temperature, texture. The sand lifted in a perfect radius, caught in the draft of expanding spiritual pressure, hanging suspended at waist height like a held breath made physical. Her Ryatsu built with a sound that wasn't quite sound, a frequency below hearing, and the king's domain responded to it, not backing away, not resisting, making room. Actively restructuring to accommodate what was expanding inside it. He felt the moment the 2 signatures aligned fully. It was like a door opening in a sealed room. Not explosive, sudden, clean, total. The light in the courtyard changed. The woman who stood in the center of it was not small. She was not child-sized, not a fragment of herself wrapped in a shelter. She was, he didn't have good words for what she was, in the immediate sensory overload of full capacity Nell, except that she was vast and present and luminous with the specific quality of something that had been waiting a long time to be exactly this. Green hair fell to her waist. The hollow mask fragment, no longer a fragment, but something complex and architectural, part of her face in the way that armor becomes part of the warrior, not obscuring but defining. Her Ryatsu was enormous in the way of deep ocean rather than explosive force, comprehensive, encompassing, the kind of pressure that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. She opened her eyes. Dark. Ancient. Full. She looked at her hands first. Both of them. Turned them over and back with the focused attention of someone confirming an outcome they'd been uncertain about. Then she looked at Halibel. Halibel's expression broke. Not into pieces, into something else. Like a wall that had been load-bearing, deciding the structure was solid enough now to rest. Something crossed her face that was grief and relief and fierceness and love, in layers too compressed to be sequential, all of it at once, and she crossed the courtyard in 6 steps and Nell met her, and the embrace they shared was not gentle but immediate, the specific force of 2 people who have known each other through catastrophic loss and come out the other side and cannot quite believe they're both still here. Izuku looked at Yoruichi. She was watching Halibel and Nell with something in her expression that was soft in a way she would have corrected if she'd noticed him noticing. He didn't point it out. Nell eventually looked over Halibel's shoulder at him. Her ancient eyes in her full form had a different quality from her child form, more settled, the youth and age of her fully integrated rather than held in tension. "You didn't overshoot," he said. "You sound almost disappointed," she said, her voice deeper now, richer. "I said I'd catch you. Next time." She released Halibel, though the Arrancar woman's hand stayed on her arm for a moment longer, confirming presence. Nell looked at Izuku and Yoruichi together with an expression that was evaluating and warm in equal measure. "How do I look?" "Like yourself," Yoruichi said. "Finally." Nell looked at her sharply, then softened. "Is that meant to be sentimental?" "Everything I say is practical," Yoruichi said. "Make of that what you will." Nell laughed, her full laugh, deeper than her child form version, resonant with it. It filled the courtyard. The white sand settled back to the ground. The Quincy came at noon. No reconnaissance. No formation check. 11 signatures. Lena's misdirection had worked, redirecting one of the 12, or possibly they'd left one back as a handler, coming through 3 simultaneous gargantas that opened at different angles above Las Noches. The entry pattern was designed to prevent the kind of roof meeting that Lena had allowed. Simultaneous, multi-directional, the gargantas closing in under 2 seconds. They came in combat ready. No hesitation. No preliminary speech. The first Heilig file hit the outer wall before the entry dust had settled. He was already outside. He'd felt the gargantas forming, felt the intent in the signatures, and had made a decision in the same breath, not inside. Not this building, not this space that was becoming something. Outside, in the open desert, where the battlefield was the blank white canvas of Hueco Mundo's endless sand and nothing could be accidentally broken except the fight itself. He hit the desert floor at a full run and went 300 meters from the wall before turning. They came over the wall after him. 11 Quincy operatives, white uniforms, weapons drawn, arrayed in a formation that he could feel was specifically designed for anti-hollow combat. The front 3 had the specialized techniques Lena had described. He could feel the specific signature of each, the Ryatsu shaped into frequencies that targeted hollow integration points, designed to break the bond between human spiritual energy and hollow power. He stood in the sand and waited. "Don't kill them," he said. To his left, Yoruichi. "They're going to be harder to not kill than the commission team." "I know." "Don't." To his right, Nell, full power Nell, who had spent the 3 hours between her resurrection and now quietly going through her own version of what she'd been waiting to do for a very long time, and whose Ryatsu at full expression was the kind of thing that made the desert itself seem to pay attention. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Behind him, Halibel. He couldn't see her but he felt her the way he felt all of them in the domain, ocean current, steady and deep. The lead Quincy stopped at 50 meters. "Our doctrine classifies negotiation with theological inconsistencies as," he began. Nell hit the formation from the left with enough zero force to pick up 3 operatives and deposit them approximately 40 meters back into the sand, unhurt but very thoroughly removed from the tactical situation. She moved through the gap she'd created with a speed that, in her full form, made the desert look like it was standing still. The lead Quincy stopped talking. Was he finished? Nell asked no one in particular, 3 of the 11 already out of commission. "Start talking," Izuku said to the lead Quincy, ignoring this. "Real conversation. Not the doctrine speech. You're already behind on the formation because you started talking and she didn't, so we can do this the way you planned or we can do it the way that actually goes somewhere useful." The lead Quincy was staring at Nell. She gave him a small wave. "The Hollow King designation," he tried, "is a stabilizing force in the original texts and you know it," Izuku said. "Because you wouldn't have needed 11 specialists if the primary interpretation was the whole picture. You'd have needed doctrine and a pamphlet." He watched the man's expression. "Someone in your faction has access to the corroborating documentation. They know the secondary interpretation is internally consistent. They're not sending 11 people because they're afraid of a corruption event. The lead Quincy's jaw was tight. They're afraid of the domain, Izuku said. They're afraid that something that makes everyone within it free to be exactly what they are is going to make their hierarchy look like what it is. He held the man's gaze. An arbitrary structure maintained by force. 4 of the remaining 8 had begun moving, not toward him, but separating, the ceiling formation attempt from the first visit now deployed in open desert rather than building corners. The sand rose around them as they drew Raisher. He felt the geometry forming. He exhaled. The domain expanded. Not gradually, immediately, the full 5-kilometer radius activating at once, the king's power pressing outward from him like a tide going out. The Raisher in the ceiling formation was caught in it. Not destroyed, not suppressed, transformed. The raw spiritual material of Hueco Mundo Desert, which the Quincy were drawing and shaping, resonated with the domain's frequency and lost its weapon shape. It became simply itself again. Sand and air and unaligned energy, no longer willing to be a cage. The ceiling formation dissolved. The 4 operatives who'd been maintaining it stumbled, not hurt, just disoriented, the specific disorientation of having the thing you were holding change state without warning. The domain was everywhere. He could feel all 11 of them inside it, feel the specialized anti-hollow Ryatsu meeting the king's ground quality and finding that it had nothing to cut. The hollow integration wasn't vulnerable because it wasn't a wound, wasn't a compromise, wasn't the corruption they'd been trained to target. It was complete. The lead Quincy stood very still. "What is this?" he said. Not a question exactly. The tone of someone processing an experience that doesn't match any prior category. "Ground," Izuku said. "It's ground." The 8 remaining operatives were standing in the sand and none of them were attacking. Not because they couldn't, the domain didn't prevent action, didn't bind, didn't immobilize. They were choosing not to attack because the thing they'd been sent to destroy didn't feel like what they'd been sent to destroy. "Your leadership," Izuku said to the lead Quincy, "is wrong. Not maliciously wrong, maybe. But wrong about what I am and wrong about what the Hollow King designation means and wrong about whether the correct response to something that doesn't fit the hierarchy is to eliminate it." He kept his voice level. "I'm not asking you to defect. I'm not asking you to change your doctrine today. I'm asking you to go back with an accurate account of what happened here, and to tell your leadership that the elimination protocol failed because the target wasn't what the doctrine said it was." "They'll send more," the lead Quincy said. "I know," Izuku said. "And I'll do this again. And again after that. As many times as it takes," Izuku said, "for the accurate information to reach the people making the decisions." The lead Quincy stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Nell, who was standing with her arms crossed and her ancient eyes patient. Looked at Yoruichi, who had not drawn her blade the entire engagement. Looked at Halibel on the desert floor, equidistant from the whole group, Tiburon at her hip and her sea glass eyes giving nothing and saying everything. He looked back at Izuku. "You took down 3 of mine in the first 2 seconds, he said. "You could have taken all 11. "Yes," Izuku said. "But you didn't." "No." The man was quiet. Something was happening in his expression, the same kind of processing Lena Voss had gone through, the doctrine running against the data, the precision-oriented mind finding the imprecise interpretation inadequate. "I'll report accurately," the man said finally. "That's all I'm asking." They left. All 11. Through a garganta that the lead Quincy opened with controlled professionalism, 3 colleagues still picking sand out of their hair from Nell's opening gambit. The garganta closed. The desert was quiet. Nell let out a long breath that was also a laugh. "I've been wanting to do that for 3 years, she said. She looked at her hands again. "Full form 0 is, I missed this." "You were beautiful," Halibel said, and she said it simply, the way she said things that were simply true. Nell looked at her. The ancient eyes went soft. "So were you. You didn't draw your sword once." He didn't need me to, Halibel said. She looked at Izuku. You understand what you did just now? Talk to them. You made them feel what the domain is, she said. 11 trained, doctrine-committed operatives came here to eliminate a theological inconsistency and went home to report accurate information. She paused. Not because you defeated them. Because you let them stand in what you built, and it was more convincing than anything they'd been told. The domain did that, he said. You are the domain, she said, the way you say something that is so clearly true that saying it is almost redundant. He stood in the sand and felt the 5-kilometer exhale of the king's power, the Quincy operative still visible at the edge of perception, passing through the domain boundary on their way to wherever they'd come from. He felt the boundary the way you feel a house wall from inside on a cold day. The warmth of what you've built, and the cold of what's outside it, and the clear definitive line between. Yoruichi came to stand beside him. Captain Fushimi, she said quietly. He'll have felt the domain expansion. That was not subtle. Good, Izuku said. She looked at him. I want him to come, he said. I want to have that conversation on my terms instead of his. She studied his profile. You're setting the meeting. I'm building the ground, he said, and letting people decide whether to stand on it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't done before, she put her hand on his arm. On the king's armor. Felt the warmth of the domain at contact range, that foundation depth quality she described the first day, and left her hand there. He looked down at her hand. Then at her. For what it's worth, she said, from where I'm standing. He turned his hand over under hers, palm up. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around it, and neither of them said anything else because the thing didn't need words, it needed exactly what it was, the quiet fact of choosing to be in the same place. Behind them, Nell made a sound that was very specifically suppressed delight and immediately converted to an unconvincing cough. Halibel said, with extraordinary dryness, subtle, Nell. I'm always subtle, Nell said. You are never subtle. I'm sometimes subtle. Izuku didn't let go of Yoruichi's hand. She didn't move away. The desert sat around them, vast and white and full of the particular quality that new things have, not finished, not settled, but oriented. Pointed in a direction that mattered. Halibel looked at the two of them, then at Nell's barely contained expression, and something moved in her sea-glass eyes that was warm in its deepest layer and had been waiting a long time to be warm without cost. She looked at Las Noches. At the walls that had been Aizen's monument and were becoming something built on an entirely different principle. She thought about her fraction. About Mila Rose and Sung Sun and Apache, about what they'd chosen and what it had cost, about the question she'd been asking for 3 years, what is loyalty worth when it ends in sand? She thought about the answer she'd been building toward without knowing it. Not an argument. Not a declaration. Just, this. This ground. This building. These people standing in it choosing to stay. She looked at Izuku, who had arrived in her desert with alien power tearing him apart from the inside and had gotten back on his feet and introduced himself. She made a decision. Not with words. With the quality of stillness that was her native language, the particular stillness that meant she had arrived somewhere and intended to remain. The covenant didn't need a ceremony. It was already made. It had been made, she understood now, in every day of the past 2 weeks, in training and breakfast and the parapet at evening and the courtyard at dawn and the space between where they were and where they'd been before he'd fallen through a rift into the wrong world. Or the right one. She looked at the desert. The white sand stretched in every direction, endless and patient and waiting, the way deserts wait, without urgency, without judgment, just the flat certainty of something that has been here long enough to know that eventually, everything finds its level. Everything finds its ground. Chapter 6, The King's Declaration. Captain Fushimi Daisuke arrived alone. That was the first thing Izuku noticed, no escort, no formation, no suppression technology in the spiritual signature of his approach. Just one man, walking across the white desert toward Las Noches with the unhurried pace of someone who had decided the meeting was on his terms regardless of who'd called it. Izuku was watching from the outer wall. He'd felt Fushimi enter the domain's boundary 40 minutes ago and had been tracking him since, a distinctive ryatsu, sharp and layered, the kind built by someone who had spent years learning to present a smaller signature than they actually carried. Professional concealment. Good concealment. The kind that would fool most perception-sensitive opponents. Not his. He watched Fushimi walk and read the architecture of him. Mid-30s. The spiritual pressure of a genuine captain-level combatant, carefully folded inside the presentation of something lesser. Intelligence in the patterns of his ryatsu movement, not aggressive but exploratory, mapping the domain as he walked through it. Taking notes. The thing that stood out was what Fushimi did when the domain's full quality hit him. Most people, the commission team, the Quincy operatives, registered it as a physical sensation. A change in air quality, a settling, the specific warmth of standing on ground that knew you were standing on it. They felt it and either accepted it or pushed against it, both reactions instinctive. Fushimi stopped walking. He stood in the desert and turned in a slow circle, and Izuku could see him not reacting but cataloging. Filing the experience with the focused attachment of a researcher who has encountered primary evidence of a theory they've held for 2 years. Then he looked directly at the wall. Directly at Izuku. From 800 meters. Izuku raised his hand. The universal greeting, continent agnostic. Fushimi started walking again. He let Fushimi come to the gate rather than going out to meet him. The distinction mattered. With the commission team he'd gone out because meeting them outside the walls was about preventing a siege, about showing openness, about giving them the best possible conditions for hearing him clearly. With the Quincy he'd moved to the desert because the building was something he wasn't willing to let become a battlefield. With Fushimi, he stayed inside. Because Fushimi had done his research, had known what Izuku was before Izuku had known it himself, and had spent 2 years building a theory and a strategy and the specific kind of confidence that comes from feeling like you're the smartest person in any given room. The only way to have a real conversation with someone like that was to already be in the room when they arrived. Fushimi came through the gate and stopped in the entrance hall and looked around with the same methodical attention he'd given the desert. His face was ordinary in the specific way of someone who had cultivated ordinariness as a tool, the kind of features that didn't call attention to themselves, that could be in a room and be forgotten. Dark hair, medium height, gray eyes that were considerably more active than the rest of him suggested. He looked at Izuku. Then at Yoruichi, behind and to the right. Halibel, left. Nell, above, she was on the second level, arms folded over the railing, looking down with her full-form ancient eyes. He catalogued all 3 in approximately 4 seconds. "You're further along than my projections," he said. His voice was mild. The professional mildness of someone who never lets inflection carry information they haven't decided to share. "Your projections were based on the integration timeline from the old texts," Izuku said. "The texts assumed the host would resist the hollow power. You didn't resist." "I decided to live," Izuku said. "The resistance was irrelevant." Fushimi looked at him for a moment. Then he almost smiled, the kind of almost smile that reaches the eyes slightly before the mouth catches up. "You found the secondary corroborating documentation." "Nell's copy of Aizen's archive," Izuku said. "He collected everything." "Aizen collected everything," Fushimi agreed. "It was his best quality and his worst one. He couldn't resist owning all the information even when some of it argued against him." He looked around the hall again. "I've been tracking the Hollow King emergence signatures for 2 years. I thought I was the only person who was looking." "You were," Izuku said. "Until I landed here." "Yes." Fushimi moved into the hall and Izuku tracked the motion with the domain, not defensively, just aware. Fushimi was good. His movements were designed to be non-threatening without being submissive, the very specific body language of someone who wanted to be read as harmless while retaining the capacity to be something else entirely. I have a proposal. I know, Izuku said. Fushimi looked at him. The almost smile again. Say it, then. Let's save time. You want to offer me standing within Soul Society's structure, Izuku said. Official designation. Recognized authority. The end of the Commission's classification problem, the Quincy Remnants theological problem, all of it resolved by bringing the Hollow King inside the framework instead of leaving it outside. He held Fushimi's gray eyes steadily. You get the domain's protection, the stabilizing force the old texts describe, pointed at whatever threat you need pointed at. I get legitimacy. Fushimi was quiet for a moment. You left out the part where you'd have access to Soul Society's full resource infrastructure, he said. The training records, the historical archives, Keto core research, you left out the part where that access comes with reporting requirements, operational parameters, and the fact that Soul Society's internal politics would spend the next decade trying to determine whether the Hollow King is an asset or a threat and treating me accordingly while they decide. Izuku kept his voice level. Which would mean I spend the next decade either proving my loyalty or managing the perception that I have. You've thought about this, Fushimi said. Nell's briefed me on Soul Society's internal culture fairly thoroughly, Izuku said. She has opinions. She always has. Fushimi glanced up at the railing where Nell was watching with focused patience. Odell Schwank. Full form. Observant, Nell said. I try. He looked back at Izuku. The framework I'm proposing isn't the standard integration path. I'm not suggesting you become a Shinigami or operate under a captain. I'm proposing a parallel designation. Independent status with mutual non-aggression and information sharing. That's a better offer than I expected, Izuku said honestly. I know what you are, Fushimi said. I'm not going to insult us both with a subpar opening position. It's still a cage, Izuku said. Better bars, more room to move, but the agreement itself becomes the structure. Everything I do becomes something Soul Society has a position on. He paused. I'm not building something that can be acquired. Fushimi studied him. Then what are you building? Something with no hierarchy over it, Izuku said simply. That's not practical, Fushimi said. In the current spiritual landscape, an independent power base without institutional backing, has been operating for 3 weeks and already turned away a commission retrieval team and 11 Quincy operatives without casualties, Yoruichi said from behind Izuku. Her voice was easy, conversational, carrying the specific authority of someone who had been in this landscape for 16 centuries and had opinions about what was and wasn't practical. Fushimi looked at her. Shihoin. Fushimi, she said. How's the captain's Haori? Provisional, he said, with the first genuine expression she'd gotten from him, a slight tightening that suggested the provisionality was a specific frustration. He looked back at Izuku. The reason institutional backing matters isn't abstract politics. The 3 fronts you're managing, the Commission, the Quincy Remnant, Soul Society's own internal factions, each of them will continue escalating until you have something they can place you in relation to. Humans need frameworks. Hierarchies. A place to put things. I know, Izuku said. That's why I'm building my own. Silence. Fushimi looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the hall, at the walls of Las Noches, at the way the domain moved through the space, at Halibel and Yoruichi and Nell in their positions. At the specific quality of the air. You're serious, he said. Completely. A new framework, Fushimi said. Not aligned with Soul Society, not aligned with Hueco Mundo's old hierarchy, not the Commission's classification system. His gray eyes were moving fast. What would that even look like, structurally? I don't know yet, Izuku said. I'm working on it. You're working on restructuring the spiritual landscape's organizational principles, Fushimi said. I'm building ground, Izuku said. What gets built on it is up to whoever stands on it. Fushimi was quiet for a very long time. You understand, he said eventually, that this will make every established power structure hostile to you. They're already hostile, Izuku said. The difference is whether I'm hostile back. And you're not. No, Izuku said. I'm not. Another silence. Fushimi looked down at his hands, a private gesture, the first one that had broken through the professional composure. When he looked up, something in his gray eyes had shifted. The cataloging quality was still there. But something else had joined it. What would information sharing look like, he said, without the framework of formal alignment? Izuku held his gaze. You bring me things Soul Society needs a non-aligned perspective on. I tell you what I see. Neither of us has operational authority over the other. He paused. You get access to the domain's stabilizing effect whenever you're in range. You get accurate information about the Hollow King's capabilities and intent. Another pause. And you go back to Soul Society and you tell them what you found here. They won't like it. I know. There are captains who will argue for a forced resolution. Tell them about the 11 Quincy who came here to eliminate a theological inconsistency and went home to file accurate reports, Izuku said. Tell them what the commission team's lead operative did with a 3-page document written in a desert archive. He met Fushimi's eyes. The pattern is visible if they want to see it. Fushimi stood very still for a long time. Then he said, I want to walk the domain. The full range. Before I give you an answer. All right, Izuku said. He walked with Fushimi for 2 hours. Not talking, mostly. Fushimi was a man who processed through observation and wanted the space to observe without narration. Izuku gave it to him. They walked the corridors of Las Noches and the outer walls and eventually the desert itself, the 5-kilometer range of the domain's full extension, and Fushimi catalogued everything with those quick gray eyes and that sharp exploratory ryatsu. At the furthest edge of the domain, where the king's ground quality began to thin against the open desert's neutral pressure, Fushimi stopped. I've felt a lot of ryatsu, Fushimi said. In 20 years of Shinigami service, every classification, every power level. He was looking at the place where the domain met the desert. I've never felt anything that felt like this. Like what? Like it was for me, Fushimi said. And he said it with the specific discomfort of someone admitting something that doesn't fit their analytical framework. That's not precise language. But, the domain makes room for whatever you are, Izuku said. It doesn't assess you. It doesn't classify you. He paused. It just acknowledges that you exist and gives you ground to stand on. Fushimi was quiet. 17 years old, he said. Yeah. You're going to be extraordinary in 10 years. He said it without ceremony. Just a prediction, precisely stated. I'm working on being useful now, Izuku said. Fushimi looked at him sideways. That's not a deflection. No, Izuku agreed. It's not. They stood at the edge of the domain for a moment. The commission will send a larger team, Fushimi said. After the 2 weeks. Possibly a hero-class response rather than operatives. I know. And the Quincy remnant leadership will eventually run out of faith in the elimination protocol and escalate to something more specialized. He paused. There's a technique in the old Yawachera arsenal. Medallion adjacent. Not widely known, but I've tracked references to it in 3 separate post-war debriefs. He looked at Izuku. It could theoretically target the hollow integration specifically. Sever the king's power from the one-for-all base. Izuku was quiet. You're telling me this, he said, before you've agreed to anything. Consider it a demonstration of good faith, Fushimi said. Or a test of your judgment, depending on how you interpret it. What's the correct interpretation? Both, Fushimi said. Simultaneously. Izuku looked at him. What do you actually want, he asked. Not the proposal, not the strategic calculation. Underneath the framework. What do you want? Fushimi was very still for a moment. To have been right, he said. About the secondary interpretation. About what the Hollow King was supposed to be. He paused. For 2 years, everyone in Soul Society who heard my theory told me the primary text was the definitive reading. That the stabilizing force interpretation was wishful scholarship. His jaw was tight for exactly 1 second, then smooth again. I want to go back and tell them I walked through it. I want to tell them the domain feels like what the secondary interpretation says it should feel like, and the elimination doctrine is, not just wrong, but actively counterproductive. He looked at Izuku. I want to be the person who has the correct information. That's honest, Izuku said. You asked for honest. I did. Izuku looked at him. Then here's the honest answer, the information is yours. What you observed today, what you felt, that's true regardless of whether we have any formal agreement. Take it back. Tell them accurately. He paused. The agreement I'm offering isn't for the information. It's for everything after the information. When they don't listen, or they partially listen and draw the wrong conclusions, and they send someone or something that requires a more complicated response, I want someone in Soul Society who knows what this actually is. Fushimi looked at him for a long moment. You're not asking for an ally, he said. You're asking for a witness. Yes, Izuku said. That's exactly right. Something settled in Fushimi's expression. The cataloging quality receded fractionally, something more personal coming forward in its place. A witness, he said. I can do that. Good, Izuku said. They walked back. Fushimi left in the early afternoon. He opened his own Garganta, Shinigami technique, clean and authoritative, and he stepped through it with the same unhurried pace he'd arrived with, but the quality of the unhurriedness had changed. He'd arrived managing his composure. He left simply carrying it. At the threshold he looked back at Izuku. The commission director read your document, he said. Izuku was still. And? She's convened a review committee, Fushimi said. The classification is under internal challenge. It won't resolve quickly, but, he paused. The door opened. The Garganta closed. The desert was quiet. Behind Izuku, Nell said, he'll be on your side eventually. He's already on his own side, Izuku said. Which is the honest version of the same thing. That's a very generous read. He gave me the medallion information before we'd agreed to anything, Izuku said. He didn't need to do that. Nell considered. True, she said. He didn't. Halibel came out through the gate and stood beside him, looking at the place where the Garganta had been. 3 fronts, she said. The commission door is open. The Quincy had accurate information to take back. Fushimi is a witness inside Soul Society. She paused. You've been building this since the first week. I've been building towards something I didn't have a complete shape for yet, Izuku said honestly. The specific form, that came from listening. She looked at him. To you, he said. To Nell and Yoruichi. He met her sea-glass eyes. I wouldn't have written the document without what you told me the first night. About being named before you name yourself. I wouldn't have held the domain back during the Quincy fight without what Nell said about what the domain is. He paused. I wouldn't have read Fushimi correctly without what Yoruichi told me about what he'd want. Halibel was quiet for a moment. You listen, she said. Not a compliment. An observation, the way she made all her observations, neutral, precise, carrying its weight in what it stated rather than how it stated it. I've always been better at listening than talking, he said. She almost smiled. The almost smile had been becoming more frequent. He'd been tracking it the way you track stars when you first learn the sky, noting position and frequency, building a map. Come inside, she said. We need to talk about the medallion technique. They talked about the medallion technique for 2 hours. Nell had the most technical knowledge. She'd been trace espada during a period when Quincy Arankar tactical theory had been a matter of survival, and she'd paid attention with the thoroughness of someone who knew that the knowledge would matter later even when it was impossible to predict how. She laid out the mechanics of the medallion-adjacent technique with the clean efficiency of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to deploy a specific set of information. It targets the resonance bond, she said. The place where two spiritual systems are harmonized rather than just coexisting. It's designed to create dissonance, to make the systems fight each other rather than work together. She looked at Izuku. If your integration were superficial, it would be devastating. But, it's not superficial, Yoruichi said. No, Nell agreed. The king's power is the product of the integration, not a separate system sitting on top of it. Targeting the resonance bond would be, she paused. Like trying to separate river water from ocean water after it's been in the ocean for 2 weeks. Theoretically possible, Izuku said. Theoretically, Nell said. But the technique was designed for early-stage integrations. It requires the bond to have clear seam lines. Yours, she gestured at him. Yours has been integrating for 3 weeks through active combat and training and, she smiled. And everything else. There are no seam lines anymore. So the thread is real but reduced, Halibel said. Reduced significantly, Nell said. But not eliminated. If someone with true Sternritter-level power deployed a refined version, pushed past the organic integration, she paused. I want you to understand the theory so you know what to feel for. Izuku nodded. He spent the next hour learning to recognize the specific spiritual frequency the medallion technique would operate on, not because he expected it to work but because Fushimi had given him the information and the information deserved to be used well. After, when the technical conversation had wound down and the light in Las Noches had shifted toward whatever the Hueco Mundo equivalent of late afternoon was, Yoruichi found him in the archive. He was writing. She stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing herself, watching him. He was aware of her, the domain told him she was there the moment she appeared, but he finished the sentence he was writing before he looked up. New notebook, she observed. The one he'd arrived with was full. He'd found blank paper in the archive and had started using it 3 days ago. For days of observations I haven't written down yet, he said. I get disorganized when I don't write. She came in and sat across from him the way she'd done the first night in the archive. The familiarity of it, the specific positioning, the easy silence, had a different quality now than it had then. 3 weeks had built something, and something was visible in the difference between how you sit with a stranger and how you sit with someone whose Ryatsu you know the way you know weather. She looked at what he was writing. Hero analysis notebooks, originally, character assessment, quirk analysis, tactical planning. The same hand, the same density of notation, but applied now to spiritual combat theory, domain mechanics, the political landscape of 3 intersecting power structures. You've been doing this since you were a child, she said. Since I was 4, he said. When I couldn't have the power I wanted to study, I studied everything else about it. And now you have the power. And I'm still writing about everything else, he said. He looked at the page. Old habit. Also, the writing is how I think. If I can't write it down, I don't fully understand it yet. She was quiet for a moment. What are you writing about right now? He turned the notebook. She leaned forward and read it. It was a list. Not analysis, something more personal. Structured as a series of statements, each one carefully worded, the handwriting more deliberate than the tactical notes. What I know. The domain is not a weapon. It is ground. Ground doesn't ask anything of the people standing on it. The power expresses what I believe at the level underneath words. What I believe, no one should be thrown away. Not the Commission. Not the Quincy. Not Bakugo. Not All Might. Not myself. She read it twice. Not All Might, she said quietly. It took me a while to get there, he said. But, He made a calculation that hurt me. He was scared. He made the decision he thought he had to make. He looked at the notebook. That's human. It's not something I need to carry as a grievance. It's something I need to understand clearly and then decide what to do with. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet, he said. But not carry it like a wound. He paused. Maybe, when I go back, when the commission's classification is resolved and the door is open enough to walk through, maybe I'll see him again. And maybe it'll be different this time. And maybe it won't. He looked at her. But I'm not building this from anger at him. That would make everything here contingent on something external. On whether he apologizes or the commission reverses course or Bakugo fixes what he said he'd fix. You're building it from something internal instead, she said. Trying to, he said. It's harder. It's the only thing that holds, she said. He held her gaze. She was very close. The archive table was not large and they'd been sitting close to it for 30 minutes. Close enough that the domain was different at this range, the way it was always different at contact range, deeper and more present. I want to say something, he said. And I want to say it clearly because I'm better at being honest than I am at being smooth about it. She waited. You told me you weren't leaving, he said. And I want you to know that I'm not going to spend my time trying to give you comfortable exits in case you change your mind. I'm not going to make it easy to leave. He paused. That's the pattern I'm working on. She looked at him for a long moment. I told you to let it be what it is, she said. I know. This is what it is. He met her eyes. I want you here. Specifically. Not generically, not as part of what's being built, but, you. Here. Yoruichi Shihoin had been in motion for 300 years and had spent most of it being the fastest thing in any given space, and the quality of her stillness now was something different from all of it. Good, she said, finally, and reached across the table and turned the notebook back toward him. Finish your list. He looked at her. The corner of her mouth had turned up, not the teasing smile, not the performance, the real one that arrived when she wasn't managing it. He turned back to the notebook. She stayed. That night, all four of them were on the outer rampart. No particular reason, no watch requirement, no threat assessment. Just the evening, and the desert, and the specific quality of having done something large and being on the other side of it. Nell was in her full form and had taken up more physical space on the rampart than her child form ever had, and was doing it with the uncomplicated ownership of someone relearning how much room they were allowed to take up. She had her arms spread along the stone railing and was watching the desert with the ancient patient eyes and the full wattage smile and both visible simultaneously. Halibel stood at the railing's edge. The sea glass eyes were open in a way they hadn't been 3 weeks ago, not more revealed, exactly, but less managed. The deep current of her moving closer to the surface, allowed to move closer to the surface, because the structure around it had been built strong enough to hold. Yoruichi sat on the railing itself, legs over the edge, her hair loose, her gold eyes on the desert. She'd stopped performing her exit several days ago and the version of her that was left, unperformed, unstrategized, just present, was something Izuku was still figuring out how to describe except that it felt like the difference between watching lightning and standing in it. He stood in the middle of all of it and felt the domain breathe. The commission door is open, Nell said. Fushimi is a witness. The Quincy had accurate reports to carry home. She tapped her fingers on the railing in a pattern he'd learned was her equivalent of satisfied thinking. Not bad for 3 weeks in a desert. We're not done, he said. Obviously, she said. Nothing interesting is ever done. She looked at him sideways. When do you go back? He'd been thinking about this. He thought about the Commission Review Committee, about the week that Fushimi had bought him with his witness status, about the documents sitting on a director's desk. About Bakugo's "I'll fix it," which he believed, and Todoroki's single nod, which he also believed. When the door is wide enough to walk through without being contained, he said. And if it doesn't get wide enough on its own? Halibel asked. Then I'll make it wider. He said it without aggression, the same way he said most things that were simply true. Not by force. By being undeniable. You're already undeniable, Yoruichi said, from the railing. Not to the people I need to be undeniable to, he said. Not yet. The desert was quiet for a moment. When you go, Halibel said, we go. He looked at her. She was looking at the desert. Not at him, at the white sand and the deep sky and the 5 kilometers of his domain stretched out across the dunes like a tide that had found a shore and decided to stay. The domain is not a building, she said. It doesn't stay behind when you leave. It goes where you go. She paused. We go where the domain goes. Halibel, I've had this conversation with myself, she said. I'm not looking for your permission or your blessing. I'm stating what's already decided. She turned, finally, and looked at him directly with those sea-glass eyes that had 3 weeks ago been the most closed thing he'd ever encountered and were now simply deep, which was different from closed in every way that mattered. My Frachin chose me. I'm choosing you. The distinction is that I'm telling you instead of making it a footnote. The weight of that, the precision of it, the deliberate and fully conscious declaration from the most carefully composed person he'd ever met, hit him somewhere under all 3 layers of his power, in the simple human center where things that mattered lived. Okay, he said. And meant it in every direction. Nell made a sound of complete approval that she didn't bother containing. I'll come, she said. Obviously. I've been waiting to go somewhere again for 3 years and your world sounds like it has excellent food. A pause. Also I have opinions about the Commission's classification system and I would like to deliver them in person. Nell, Yoruichi said. My opinions are valid and well-researched, Nell said. I know. Save them for when they'll land. Yoruichi looked at Izuku. I go where the interesting questions are, she said. And you are still the most interesting question I've encountered. She held his gaze. I'll be there when you walk through the door. He looked at the 3 of them, ocean and lightning and ancient light, and felt the king's power settle in his chest, felt one for all warm and present, felt the hollow inheritance vast and patient beneath both, and understood with the specific clarity of someone who has spent a long time without ground finding it at last, this was the foundation. Not the power. Not the designation. Not the political maneuvering or the documents or the domain's 5-kilometer reach. These 3 people who had each been discarded in different ways by different structures and had each, in their own language and time, chosen to stand here, this was what it was built on. He could go back now. Not because the door was wide enough yet. Not because the Commission had reversed the classification or the Quincy Doctrine had been amended or Soul Society had issued a favorable determination. None of those things had happened yet and all of them might take years. He could go back because he knew what he was. He was not a bomb. He was not a risk calculus. He was not a quirk evolution requiring containment. He was not the boy they'd expelled, or the symbol All Might had given him to carry, or the Commission's threat assessment, or the Quincy's theological inconsistency, or Fushimi's long-held theory finally confirmed. He was the ground. He was the thing that made room. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he was 17 years old, and he had a power that expressed what he believed at the level underneath words, and what he believed was that no one should be thrown away, not the people who'd hurt him, not the structures that had failed him, not the world that had written him a letter and called it safety. He believed people deserved better than the world had been giving them. He intended to do something about that. He went to his room and wrote for a long time. Not the observation notebook, a different document, the second one he'd started in the archive. Longer. More structured. The shape of a proposal rather than a record. He wrote about what the domain was. About what the Hollow King designation meant in its primary corroborated interpretation. About the structural function of a power that stabilized rather than dominated, that made room rather than claimed space. He wrote it in the plain, clear language he'd used for hero analysis since he was 4 years old, and he wrote it for an audience he knew, people who made decisions based on data, who built policy on classification, who needed a framework to place things in before they could respond to them. He wrote them a framework. It took 4 hours. When he was done, he read it through once and corrected 3 places where the language was imprecise. Then he folded it and wrote on the outside, for the commission director. From Midoriya Izuku. To be delivered when the review committee has reached preliminary conclusions. He set it on the table. He went to bed. He lay in the dark of Las Noches and felt the domain around him, 5 kilometers of ground, of space where things could be exactly what they were without cost. He felt Halibel in the east wing, the deep ocean current of her Ryatsu moving in the particular rhythm he'd learned to recognize as sleep. Nell in the central rooms, both signatures running in easy parallel, the ancient and the present fully reconciled. Yoruichi above, on the rampart, still awake. She didn't sleep early, she never slept early, she was up there watching the desert with gold eyes and whatever was running through her at 2 a.m., and the domain knew she was there the same way it knew all of them, with the warm specific acknowledgement of something that had found its people. He closed his eyes. No one should be thrown away. The foundation held. The desert breathed. Somewhere in the deep white distances of Hueco Mundo, a hollow called out, low, long, mournful. The king's domain reached it at 5 kilometers and the call changed quality. Not eliminated. Not suppressed. Just, met. Acknowledged. Here is ground. You can stand here. Izuku slept. 3 weeks later, Bakugo sent a message. It arrived through a spiritual relay Fushimi had quietly established, one of the early demonstrations of what being a witness looked like in practice, and it was short, because Bakugo's messages were always short, and it said, Commission classification suspended pending comprehensive review. Provisional reinstatement eligible. They want a meeting. Your call. He read it on the outer rampart in the morning, with the white desert stretched before him and Las Noches alive behind him and 3 familiar Ryatsu signatures in his awareness, Halibel training in the courtyard, Nell in the archive reading something she'd found that she'd apparently told no one about yet, Yoruichi sitting beside him on the railing with a cup of something that passed for coffee in Hueco Mundo. She read it over his shoulder. Your call, she said. Yeah, he said. What's the call? He looked at the desert. Felt the domain, patient and warm and comprehensive, 5 kilometers of ground in every direction. Felt one for all in his blood, the predecessor's accumulated strength, 7 people who had chosen to give rather than keep. Felt the hollow inheritance vast and tidal beneath it. Felt the king's power, the child of all of it, steady and quiet and fundamentally, irreducibly his. He thought about All Might's face. About a commission boardroom. About a letter slid under a door on a Tuesday. He thought about what he'd built in 3 weeks in the white desert with 3 women who had chosen to stand on his ground. About Lena Voss doing the right thing at high personal cost. About Fushimi walking 5 kilometers of domain and going back to tell the truth about it. About Shida Riko, commission operative, taking a handwritten document and putting it on a director's desk. He thought about the line in his notebook, not myself. We go, he said. Yoruichi's mouth curved, the real one. He went to find Halibel and Nell. They left Las Noches at noon. All 4 of them, walking out through the main gate into the white desert. Izuku in front with the king's armor settled on his arm. Halibel on his left, Tiburon at her hip, sea-glass eyes clear and forward. Nell on his right, full form, ancient bright and entirely herself. Yoruichi behind his right shoulder, close enough that her warmth was present in the domain, gold eyes level and ready. The desert spread before them. The domain moved with him, not projecting outward aggressively, not announcing, simply present the way foundations are present. 5 kilometers of ground, moving across the white sand like a tide that had decided it had somewhere to be. He opened the Garganta himself. His own technique, developed over 2 weeks from Halibel's instruction and Nell's architectural theory and the specific grammar of the king's power, which could open passages between spaces not because it was a doorway power but because the foundation quality could extend across the gap between worlds and give the passage somewhere to anchor. It was different from Commission Gargantas or Quincy Gates or Shinigami Senkaman. It was wider. Stable in the way of something that expected to be used regularly. He looked back at Las Noches. The ruined castle stood in the white desert in the flat noon light, enormous and bone-white and increasingly less ruined, the weeks of habitation and domain saturation having done something subtle to the architecture, not repair, not renovation, but the specific change that happens to a space when it's been genuinely inhabited. When it's been lived in and trained in and argued in and laughed in and had breakfast in at a table that kept getting more crowded. Alive was the word. Las Noches was alive. He held that for a moment. Then he turned to face the Garganta. Ready? Yoruichi asked, from his shoulder. Been ready for 3 weeks, he said. She laughed, the real one, uninvited, warm. He stepped through. The world changed around him, the texture of Hueco Mundo giving way to the specific quality of the human world, the weight of living Ryatsu, the complicated layered density of a city that contained millions of souls each carrying their own spiritual frequency. Japan. Karakura town's spiritual geography, recognizable even from the inside of a Garganta. Home. Different from how he'd left it. So was he. He stepped out onto a rooftop in the early morning, the city spread below him and the sky above him and the domain expanding outward from his feet like the first breath after a long time underwater, natural, necessary, the specific relief of something returning to its native element. 3 steps behind him, Halibel emerged from the Garganta with Tiburon's familiar weight at her hip and her sea-glass eyes reading the new landscape with the focused attention she brought to everything. Nell came through laughing already, something about the city's Ryatsu density, which she apparently found charming. There are so many people, she said. All of them are very loud spiritually. I love it. Yoruichi came last. She stepped out and stood beside him and looked at the city below and then at him, and her gold eyes had something in them that was not quite what the past 3 weeks had built toward but was the continuation of it, the same chord in a different register. The meeting, she said. With the commission. Today, he said. I'll contact Shida. She'll arrange it. And if they don't, they will, he said. The document did its work. Bakugo did his work. Fushimi is doing his. He looked at the city. But it doesn't actually matter. She looked at him. Whether they reinstate me or not, he said. Whether the commission accepts the new framework or fights it for another 5 years. Whether Soul Society's internal politics resolve in a week or a decade. He paused. I know what I am. I know what the power is for. I know what I'm building. He looked at her. Everything else is just, the world catching up. Yoruichi was very still for a moment. Then she did something he would think about for a long time afterward. She put her hand on his arm, on the king's armor, at the contact range where the domain was deep and specific, and she kept it there, and she said, then let's give them something worth catching up to. Below them, the city moved. Millions of people, going about the complicated difficult ordinary business of being alive in the world, carrying their spiritual signatures like the specific weight of who they were, none of them knowing that the ground under their city had changed. That something new was standing on it. That something had decided to make it worth standing on. Izuku Midoriya looked at the city he'd grown up in, the city that had written him a letter and called it safety, the city that was going to get a chance to see him clearly, and he felt the king's power settle in his chest with the specific quality of something finding its purpose, the warm lightning of 7 predecessors, the vast cold patience of the hollow inheritance, and at the center of all of it, the thing that had always been there underneath all the names anyone had ever given him. No one should be thrown away. He was going to make that true. The domain breathed. The city breathed back. He was home.